Hey everyone, welcome back to Dreamland Encounters. I'm here to share real-life stories about beings from beyond the skies, helping you relax and drift off to sleep. Drop a comment and let me know where you're tuning in from. Get comfortable, and let's dive into tonight's story. It was late June in northern New Mexico, the kind of night where heat clings to everything. I was working the night shift at a gas station off Highway 70, one of those places people only stop at because there's nothing else for miles around. Halfway through my shift, I was alone, trying to stay awake by restocking shelves and wiping down the counter for the third time. Around 2:15 a.m, the sky outside suddenly lit up. Not like lightning, but more like a massive camera flash exploding across the desert. For a split second, everything turned white. I saw every grain of dust hanging in the air, and shadows cast sharp and wrong against the windows. The store lights flickered but didn't go out. I stepped outside to investigate, but darkness had already returned. No sound, no trail, nothing in the sky, just complete silence. Even the insects had stopped their usual nighttime chorus. A few minutes later, headlights appeared on the highway. Two bright beams moving fast, then slowing as they turned into the lot. A black sedan, older model, shiny as if it had just been washed. Instead of stopping at the pump, the car pulled around and parked along the side of the building where nobody usually parks. Something felt off. Most people who come through at that hour either want gas or directions. Nobody just parks and sits. Back behind the counter, I pretended to look busy while keeping an eye on the glass door. About a minute later, the bell rang. Two men walked in, dressed identically in black suits, the kind you'd wear to a funeral. White shirts, black ties, polished black shoes that looked brand new. Their clothes were spotless, which was strange because dust gets on everything out here. Both men were the same height, pale and clean-shaven. I couldn't determine their age. Something about their faces made them hard to place. Not young, not old, just blank. They didn't say a word or even look at me. Moving in perfect synchronization, they walked straight toward the coffee station. I was working the night shift at the store when two men came in and stood by the coffee machine. They didn't move or respond when I asked if they needed help. Something felt off, but I couldn't explain why. They were unnaturally still, positioned on opposite sides of the machine. A car passed outside, its headlights sweeping through the windows. When the light hit them, both men turned their heads simultaneously, slow and smooth. For a split second, their skin looked strange, almost flat like wax. Then they turned back to the wall. Unsure what to do, I went to the back office to call my boss, Gary. The call was weird. As I was talking, the line suddenly cut out. No click, no static, just silence. When I tried to call again, the phone was dead. Returning to the counter, I realized the men had vanished. No door chime, no sound of a car leaving. I checked outside, but the black sedan was gone. The highway stretched empty in both directions. The clock showed 2:37 a.m. Somehow 20 minutes had disappeared. The rest of the shift felt eerie and quiet. I kept watching the windows, expecting headlights to return, but nothing happened. When Eli arrived in the morning, I explained what occurred. He laughed at first, thinking I was joking, but became serious when I mentioned the flash. He'd seen something similar while driving into town, thinking it was an explosion or a blown transformer. We pulled up the security footage. Initially, everything looked normal. I could see myself behind the counter, then stepping outside during the flash. The camera captured a white screen for a moment before returning to darkness. Minutes later, the black sedan arrived and the two men walked inside. That's when we noticed something bizarre. Their faces were blurred, not pixelated, but smeared like someone had erased them. Every other detail remained crystal clear. Their suits, shoes, even the floor tiles, but their faces looked like fog. I started noticing something odd during my night shifts at the gas station. At first, I thought it might just be a technical glitch. We rewound and paused the security footage, but the problem remained. Every frame showed blurred faces, even when people turned toward the camera. Reviewing the recordings from when I walked into the office revealed something strange. In the background, men stood at the coffee station, but when I returned just minutes later, they had vanished. No door opened, no movement. They were simply gone. Eli suggested I might have edited the footage, which frustrated me. Why would I do that? Then he pointed out something I'd missed. The clock in the corner skipped from 228 to 2:37, the exact same time gap I'd seen on the register. We checked the outside cameras next. The camera pointed at the pumps caught a black sedan pulling up but not leaving. It just sat parked along the wall until 2:28, then the feed jumped. In the next frame, the car had disappeared. The reflection was the weirdest part. The station's windows showed a faint reflection of the pumps, and in that reflection, the car remained visible for a few frames after vanishing from the main camera view. Then the reflection blinked out too. Eli stopped the playback and stayed silent for a while. He told me not to discuss it with Gary, warning we'd sound crazy. During the following nights, everything seemed normal, but whenever a car approached on the highway, my heart would race. I'd find myself staring at the door, waiting for those two to return. About a week later, I discovered the hard drive from the security system was missing. The case remained, but the drive with all recordings had been removed. Gary mentioned someone from corporate had replaced it that afternoon, a guy in a black suit with a work order. I couldn't get more details. I quit a month later. Now, driving home late, I never stopped to investigate a flash in the sky. Sometimes, passing the old station, now closed and boarded up, I swear I see a black car parked silently beside the building, lights off. I've never stopped to check. I was staying at a small roadside place off Route 93 in southern Nevada. In late March, I was staying near Caliente for a freelance piece about rural tourism, essentially a story covering ghost towns and desert hiking trails. The days were warm, and I'd leave my window slightly open at night. Cool evenings stretched out, quiet and still. Around 10:30 p.m, the night before everything changed, I was sitting outside my room, smoking a cigarette and killing time. The clear sky offered an uninterrupted view. What initially looked like a plane caught my eye, a bright white light moving slowly. But something felt off. This wasn't a typical aircraft movement. It would stop, hover, then drift sideways before making an impossibly sharp right-angle turn, like a cursor being dragged across a screen. After watching for a minute, the light simply vanished, not fading, just gone. The next morning at the motel lobby, I mentioned this to Marcy, the manager. She chuckled. People around here see things all the time. I wasn't trying to make a big deal of it, just found it peculiar. Later, while writing notes, I sent a brief message to the Lincoln County Sentinel about a strange light over Highway 93. At 3:07 a.m, someone knocked on my door. 3 steady knocks, a pause, then 3 more. Checking through the peephole, 2 men stood outside, wearing identical black suits, crisp white shirts, and black ties. Their clothing looked brand new, without a speck of dust, which was unusual for this area. They were almost identical, same pale skin, narrow faces, and short dark hair. The slightly taller one smiled, but it wasn't a real smile. It was more like someone practicing how a smile might look. And they arrived early, speaking in flat, measured tones. Mr. Hayes, the taller one, introduced their purpose. Questions about a reported sighting. When I confirmed I was the witness, they asked me to describe what I'd seen. The white light's strange movement and sudden vanishing caught their attention. They stood motionless while I spoke, listening intently. Then the shorter agent interrupted with an unsettling question about being watched, something I hadn't mentioned. Their synchronized reactions were peculiar. When one asked about unusual fatigue, I simply answered no. The agents exchanged a look, then inquired about photos or video. My negative response seemed to please them. Good, they said in unison, their thanks delivered with identical rhythm before departing. After they left, I locked the door, confused. The parking lot was empty. No car, no trace. Sleepless, I waited until morning and approached the front desk. Marcy confirmed no visitors except some truckers. We checked security footage. My movements were clear. Smoking at 10 Care, returning to my room. At around 3 a.m, nothing. The hallway remained completely empty, even when I'd opened my door to check. By noon, a black sedan appeared, pristine and out of place among local vehicles. 2 men in matching suits sat inside, watching silently. Their faces remained hidden, but their presence felt deliberate. Something wasn't right, and I couldn't shake the feeling that this encounter was far from ordinary. 4 years ago, I was working maintenance for the state park system in southern Nevada. My job that day was to inspect and photograph damage to an old ranger cabin on the preserve's north end. The structure was a relic from the 50s, barely holding together with rusted nails and desert dust. I left the maintenance yard just after sunrise in early September. The drive took me through 50 miles of empty 2-lane road, cutting straight through open scrubland. By the time I reached the dry lake bed where the cabin sat, temperatures were already pushing 90 degrees. The air shimmered off the asphalt and not another vehicle was in sight. The silence was extraordinary. No birds, no wind, just that dense, buzzing quiet you experience in the desert when heat becomes so thick it seems to muffle sound itself. The cabin was half collapsed and I parked about 20 yards away. 20 minutes after arriving, they drove off. Deciding to check out early, I told Marcy I'd go 10 steps further into the story I needed. She gave me this look, half concerned, half like she didn't want to ask. Driving north toward Ellery, I tried shaking something off but kept checking the rearview mirror. Every time I passed a black car, my stomach flipped. That night at a motel outside Ellery, I left the TV on while sleeping. Around 1 a.m. the power flickered once, just enough to wake me. I could swear I saw headlights sitting still down the road. No engine noise. They vanished by the time I blinked. 2 days after returning home, I found a voicemail on my phone. No caller ID, just static at first. Then a voice flat like those text-to-speech recordings. "Thank you for your cooperation." Then it clicked off. I tried tracing the call, but my carrier showed no incoming record. After that, I stopped discussing what I saw. No follow-up stories, no mentioning the lights. Months later, an envelope arrived with no return address. Inside was a single blank piece of paper with one typed line. You were not supposed to see it move. I immediately threw it out, but for days I kept thinking about a question they'd asked regarding fatigue. Since that night, I haven't slept through till morning once. Every single night I wake between 3 and 3:10 a.m. for no reason. No noise, no dream, just suddenly wide awake. And sometimes, before opening my eyes, I sense someone standing right outside the door, not knocking, just waiting. And I was out doing routine work, checking a site's condition. That day involved taking photos, making notes about potential repairs, and taking a breather on my truck's tailgate while drinking warm Gatorade. Something unusual caught my eye near the horizon, a metallic glint that didn't behave like normal aircraft. It hovered higher than a drone but lower than any standard flight path, sliding sideways with an eerily smooth motion. When I tried recording it on my phone, the screen went black and the camera froze. Repeated attempts yielded the same result. By the time I looked up again, the object had vanished. At first, I dismissed it as a light trick or heat mirage. The encounter seemed unremarkable until my drive back toward town. A black Lincoln sedan sat parked on the roadside shoulder, unnaturally clean with windows tinted beyond legal limits. As I passed, I couldn't detect any driver or movement inside. It wasn't until checking my rearview mirror that I realised the car was now following me. My driving remained steady, not accelerating, not slowing. The vehicle maintained a consistent 5 or 6 car lengths behind me. With each turn I made, it followed precisely. I tried rationalising it as a coincidence, perhaps lost tourists, but the behaviour felt deliberate. Reaching a small town near the ranger station, I pulled into a diner parking lot, hoping to lose my mysterious tail in the local traffic. The Lincoln rolled past the corner without its headlights, despite the approaching dusk, then disappeared around a bend. Days later, an unexpected call came to my work phone from an unknown number. The voice sounded male but unnaturally flat, like someone reading from a prepared script. "Mr. Baxter, you were in Sector 12B on Monday, correct?" When I asked about his department, he simply stated verification purposes only, and hung up. Later I discovered the number had vanished from my recent calls. Strange occurrences continued. I began finding my truck doors unlocked each morning, despite always securing them. Nothing was disturbed or missing, just different. Something felt fundamentally off. That night started around 9 with headlights parked by the fence line across the gravel lot. A black Lincoln, stationary and silent. I sat watching for almost 15 minutes while the car's engine ran, no movement inside. Deciding to investigate, I walked toward it with a flashlight, calling out that the property was closed. Immediately the lights went dark. By the time my eyes adjusted, the car had vanished. Hours later, around 2:00 in the morning, 3 sharp knocks echoed on my door. Through the peephole, 2 men stood on the porch, identical in appearance. Black suits, white shirts, black ties. their hair cut short, faces wearing polite smiles that felt oddly manufactured. The shorter man spoke first, voice calm and measured. "Mr. Baxter, we'd like to ask you a few questions about your field work." When I asked about their organisation, he glanced at his taller companion before responding. They were from the Department of Energy, following up on local activity. I requested identification. Simultaneously, both reached into their jackets and produced black leather folders. Examining them closely, I noticed something strange. The folders were blank, with no visible badge or printed information. The taller man dismissed this, claiming the IDs were temporary. Their questioning continued. Had I noticed anything unusual recently? I kept my answers brief, hoping to end the interaction. The shorter man's phrasing caught my attention. Personal device sounded awkward, as if the words didn't quite fit natural speech. After a brief exchange, they thanked me for cooperating. In perfect synchronization, they turned, walked down my steps, and drove away in the same black Lincoln I'd seen earlier. I listened to the engine start, but when I looked down the road, no trace remained. The next morning I checked my door camera. The footage showed me talking to seemingly empty space. Sleepless nights followed, filled with a persistent low humming outside the house, a sound that seemed to hover just beyond explanation. And in an electrical transformer hummed in the distance, its sound seeming to emanate from everywhere at once. Murphy, my dog, would lift his head and stare at the window without barking. About a week later, while driving to another site near the dry lake, my radio suddenly cut out mid-song, replaced by static. Then a faint mechanical voice broke through, saying my name, Evan. I pulled over, shut off the truck and listened. The voice uttered one more cryptic phrase. "You'll forget the details." Then silence. When I turned the ignition back on, the radio worked perfectly, the station playing as if nothing had happened. Strange occurrences followed. Co-workers mentioned surveyors asking about me at the ranger station, 2 men in suits who showed ID and claimed to be confirming environmental readings. No one could recall their names, and the visitor log for that week mysteriously disappeared. About a month later, I discovered a small, smooth metal disc in my truck bed. No markings, about the size of a quarter, and surprisingly warm despite being parked overnight in 40-degree weather. I instinctively threw it into the brush. Since then, I've tried to move on, continuing my work with the parks, but avoiding that sector. Occasionally I'll spot a dark sedan on the highway behind me, though I can never be certain it's the same vehicle. The desert plays tricks with light and perception. What truly puzzles me is the missing inspection trip file. Every report I've ever done automatically saves to the shared database, except this one. The entry number jumps from 218 to 220, as if report 219 never existed. When I asked our admin about it, she insisted I didn't file a report that day. But I know I was there. I still have the sunburn to prove it. I live just outside Astoria, Oregon, near the coast. My small wood-sided house with its perpetually damp front porch is home. Working late nights editing marketing videos, I'm usually up when most are asleep. Weeks ago, while out back with my dog Milo, I noticed unusual lights over the tree line. These weren't typical aircraft heading to Portland or Seattle. They were lower, brighter, different. They drifted silently in a line and then stopped completely. No movement, no noise, they just hung there. One by one the lights flickered out until only a single light remained. It dimmed slowly and vanished. I captured about 40 seconds of this on my phone. The lights were pretty clear, even though the footage was shaky. I recorded without saying a word, simply zooming in and holding the shot. Later that night, I uploaded the video to my personal channel. Nothing special, just a simple title about strange lights over Astoria on March 18th. By the next afternoon, it had somehow reached 1,000 views, which was odd considering my channel only had around 50 followers. That night, a black van appeared across the street around 10 p.m. No logos, no visible plates, just sitting there with its lights off. I assumed it belonged to someone visiting neighbours, but an hour later, it was still in the same spot. By morning, it was gone. The next night followed the same pattern. Around 9:30, the van returned and parked in the exact same place. No lights, no movement. I turned off my living room lamp and watched through the window until nearly midnight, careful not to sound paranoid. On the third night, I took a photo through the blinds. The van's outline was faint, barely visible except for the reflection of my living room light. but it was proof the van was there. Soon it became a routine. For a week, the van parked in the same spot every night between 9 and 10, always leaving before dawn. I started to suspect something wasn't right when I noticed the video's view count. Around the 5th night, my channel's views had jumped to over 6,000. The comments were strange. Multiple accounts posting identical messages. Take it down. I reported them as spam, but new ones kept appearing. Unknown numbers began calling, never leaving voicemails, just a single ring before hanging up. On the 7th night, I decided to confront whoever was behind this. The van showed up just after 9:30, parked across the street as always. The air was cold and foggy. I stood at the window, then grabbed my jacket and went outside. Milo followed me onto the porch, growling softly. As I stepped off the curb, the van's engine started. No headlights, just the motor turning over. I pulled up my security camera feed from the night before, and it showed something strange. I was walking out onto the porch and then stepping into the street. The van sat there, a faint outline under the streetlight. But just before it started moving, the footage glitched. A single skipped frame revealed the van going, from parked to halfway down the street. No acceleration, no movement, just an instant jump. I replayed it dozens of times, always seeing the same thing. 1 second parked, next second gone. Kelly said this could happen if the camera connection drops momentarily, and I guess that might be true. But I'd never seen it do that before. Something felt off. The street was completely silent except for Milo whining behind me when the van first turned the corner and disappeared down the hill without its lights on. The next morning my video was gone. At first I thought YouTube might have flagged it, but when I logged into my account it showed deleted by user, and I hadn't touched it. Checking the account activity revealed the deletion came from a device signed in from a Nevada location I'd never heard of. I changed my passwords and enabled two-factor verification, though it didn't make me feel better. That afternoon, I called Kelly, who's good with tech stuff. She came over, looked at my laptop and said it didn't seem like a typical hack, more like someone had direct access. When I told her no one else had my login info, she suggested checking the security camera. Later that night, around 2 a.m, headlights swept across my living room wall, slow like a car idling past. I looked out and saw a black sedan, not the van this time. 2 men were inside. One turned his head toward my house as they passed. They didn't stop. I watched until they were out of sight. When I finally went to bed, Milo barked once in his sleep. A short, sharp sound that made my heart jump. 2 days later, a white envelope appeared in my mailbox with no return address. Inside was a printed photo, grainy and low resolution, like it came from an old phone. It was a still from my own security camera footage, showing me standing in the street. Jut and I discovered an unusual sentence typed across the bottom of a van I was looking at. It read, "Curiosity is not a shield." Concerned, I contacted the police. A young officer arrived, seeming sceptical but polite. I shared the photo, footage and details about the van. He took notes and promised to keep watch. Nothing happened for a while. I started believing it might be an online prank targeting me after a video gained attention. But a week later, everything changed. At a 4-way intersection near the bridge, I spotted the same black sedan waiting at the light across from me. The driver stared straight ahead, hands gripping the wheel. The passenger turned slightly, looking directly at me, wearing sunglasses despite the foggy day. I tried acting casual, glancing down at my phone. When I looked up again, the light had turned green and the sedan vanished. That night, strange things escalated. My YouTube account showed another login attempt, blocked from somewhere in New Mexico. No identifiable IP or device details, just unknown. I stopped uploading videos entirely. The phone calls ceased. No more vans or sedans parked outside. Yet, periodically, around the same time the van used to appear, my front camera's motion alert would ping. Opening the feed revealed nothing, just an empty street and my porch light reflecting on wet pavement. Once, I caught something unusual. 2 dark shapes stood side by side at the frame's edge before the feed froze and skipped ahead 3 minutes. I saved the clip to a flash drive, but when I tried playing it later, the file appeared corrupted. I unplugged the camera and now keep it in a drawer. Life seems mostly normal. Every few weeks I'll spot a black car parked unexpectedly, at the grocery store, post office, diner or near the docks. Always clean, always idling. I tell myself it's just a car. I start my engine and drive home, but before entering I always check across the street, just in case. Not just as I was hiking in Joshua Tree, my day spent on a quiet service road known for its solitude. My small pack held just water, snacks, and a camera. The sky was a deep, dry blue that made the rocks stand out, and the warm desert air had that sharp edge that bites if you stop moving. About half a mile down the road, I spotted the first SUV. It was black, the kind of paint that seems to swallow light, parked crookedly against the rocks, half on sand, half on gravel. At first, I didn't think much of it. Hikers often leave vehicles in such spots, but as I got closer, something felt off. The windows were spotlessly clean. No dust, no sand, no keys in the ignition, no papers inside. Strange, but I shrugged it off. Maybe a ranger's vehicle or someone working on a trail report. A mile further, I found a second SUV, identical in every way. Same black colour, same crooked parking, same clean windows, completely still. I slowed down, the dry wind brushing sand against my ankles. Walking around each vehicle, I searched for footprints or signs of anyone nearby. Nothing. No tracks leading away, no recent marks in the sand except my own. I circled the first SUV again, trying to see what I might have missed. It remained empty. I caught myself talking out loud, muttering, "Well, that's creepy," to the desert air. My voice seemed to bounce differently, softer, as if the rocks were absorbing the sound. I continued hiking, keeping an eye on the horizon. Everything looked normal, but a strange feeling of being watched began to creep in. My skin tingled. I kept looking back, but the SUVs remained motionless. Hours later, I reached my car at the trailhead. I dropped my pack in the sand and stretched, finally letting my muscles relax. That's when I saw them. Footprints in the sand. Not mine. They were heavy, wide, leading straight from the service road to where my car was parked. I froze. No one was around. No movement, no shadow, no sound. Just these fresh footprints, not yet blown over by the wind. Crouching down, I examined them. The prints were clean, deep, and evenly spaced, as if someone had been walking steadily and deliberately. And I was driving along the desert service road when something caught my attention. The SUVs that had been parked earlier were now gone without a trace. I'd been walking around near them just moments before, and if someone had passed by, they would have had to cross my path or pass one of the parked vehicles, but there were no signs of movement, no shadows, no figures. I carefully circled the car, noticing the footprints that stopped right at the tyres. Strangely, the driver's side showed no touched door handle, no scuff marks on the paint. A quick check inside revealed the car was locked and empty. My pulse quickened as the desert silence pressed down on me. Looking back down the service road, I saw nothing. The SUVs had vanished completely. I thought about running to investigate, but the roads stretched endlessly. No dust clouds, no movement. It was like they'd never been there at all, except for those first half-mile of footprints leading directly to my car. I locked myself inside, trying to rationalise what I'd seen. Maybe it was a trick of light or someone moving incredibly fast, but the prints were too clear, too precise. The drive back was tense. Every shadow among the rocks made me jump. Wind gusts sounded like footsteps on gravel. My phone's spotty service didn't help my nerves. I tried calling a friend but couldn't get a signal. The desert felt too open, too quiet. That evening, I checked the photos I'd taken. The SUVs were in the first few frames, exactly where I remembered. But in the last frames before reaching my car, they had disappeared. Not blurry or half-hidden, just gone. The footprints in the sand were absent from the photos entirely. The next morning I called a ranger. No maintenance reports, no patrols, no hikers. When I described the exact location, noting the rock formations, road bend, scrub and Joshua trees, he seemed puzzled. A week later, I returned to the site. The sand had been blown over. No traces remained. No signs of the SUVs. Nothing unusual except the endless spread of rocks and desert scrub. I still can't explain what happened. Was it a prank? An unknown patrol? Something else entirely? The mystery remains unsolved. Hiking these trails still haunts me. I remember those black SUVs sitting motionless like statues, and footprints leading to a car that no one had touched. Something about the timing and distance felt impossible. Back when I worked at KQRC Channel 7, a small-town news station in Nebraska that mostly covered farm reports and high school sports. We've been running stories about strange light shows over the Platte River. This was about 5 years ago in early November, cold windy nights where static electricity crackled in your hair. People kept calling about bright orbs hovering low and moving in ways planes never could. We usually brushed off such stories, but this time was different. We had so many reports that we sent a field reporter out. He returned with shaky footage showing 3 lights darting in a triangle formation before fading behind the tree line. It wasn't great video, but it made our 6 p.m. broadcast. That night the phones lit up. More people confirmed they'd seen the same lights at the same time. The segment got picked up by a regional affiliate, one of our bigger reactions in months. The next morning 2 men arrived at the station asking to speak with me. As the evening anchor I met them. They introduced themselves as investigators from the Federal Aeronautics Department. That's exactly how one of them phrased it. Something felt odd about them from the start. Both wore identical black suits, white shirts and black ties. No coats, despite the freezing weather. They looked remarkably similar. Same height, build, pale complexions. Their voices were flat and measured, like every word was carefully rehearsed. The taller one did most of the talking. He said they were investigating unauthorized aerial phenomena and wanted to make a brief on-air statement to clarify some misconceptions. That word, unauthorized, stuck with me. Normally, we'd never let strangers go live without verifying credentials, but they had official-looking paperwork with letterhead signatures and a Washington, D.C. contact number. Our news director, Ben, checked everything. I still tell this story in fragments, but the images remain vivid in my mind. The broadcast felt off from the start. 2 men arrived at the studio without any fuss, no makeup, no lighting adjustments. They sat motionless while the tech crew prepared. At precisely 6:12 p.m, we went live. I introduced them as federal agency representatives investigating recent aerial lights. Both nodded simultaneously. The taller man began speaking in a flat, emotionless tone. He explained the lights were part of a meteorological drone exercise, concluding that no threat existed. His voice remained perfectly steady, blinking exactly once every few sentences. His companion stayed silent, staring directly at me the entire time. Something felt fundamentally wrong. The answers seemed disconnected from the questions, like a rehearsed script. When I thanked them, they smiled in unison, small mechanical grins that never reached their eyes. Immediately after, they left without interaction, simply stating, "Thank you for your cooperation," before walking into the dark parking lot together. After the show, I reviewed the archived recording at home. Initially everything appeared normal, local weather, a school board meeting, my introduction about aerial sightings. But when the segment should have continued, the feed glitched. A half-second freeze, then static. The audio buzzed for about 5 seconds before cutting back to my closing remarks. The entire interview had vanished. I checked every recording system, live feed, studio archive, broadcast replay. All were identical, cut out at the exact same moment. When my colleagues arrived, none remembered filming the segment. Ben, our news director, insisted we'd never hosted these guests. The broadcast schedule showed a blank local interest filler where the segment should have been. Something wasn't right. Not even close. And I found these index cards still on my desk, with the taller man's name written across the top in my handwriting, Agent Barlow. When I showed it to Ben, he said it wasn't possible. He'd been sitting in the control room all night and would have remembered scheduling something like that. He thought maybe I'd prepped it and it got cut before airtime, but I knew it happened. I remembered his voice, the way he said unauthorized. I asked Todd, our camera guy, if he remembered adjusting shots for 2 guests. He frowned and said I only had 1 interview last night, the guy from the animal shelter. That's when I started feeling genuinely unsettled. I went to the lobby security camera footage. Our 24-hour recording system loops every 2 days, so I scrubbed back to that morning when the men first arrived. What I saw was strange. The front door opened, and then nothing. The footage jumped 5 seconds ahead. One frame was empty, the next showed the door closing. No one was visible entering or leaving. The same gap appeared when I checked the camera over the hallway leading to the studio, a 5-second skip where they should have been walking through. That afternoon, I called the DC number from the letter they'd shown us. A woman answered. When I mentioned the department's name, Federal Aeronautics Division, She paused for a long moment and said there was no such office. Then she hung up. I still had the paperwork, so I scanned it, planning to send it to a friend who worked in records at the state capitol. The next morning, when I opened the file, the scan was blank, completely white. I went back to the paper copy, thinking maybe the scanner malfunctioned, but the ink was gone. The pages were still warm from the printer, but totally blank. That night I got a call at home from a blocked number. I let it go to voicemail. When I played it back, it was 6 seconds of silence. Then a voice saying, "Correction issued." Male voice, calm, slow, slightly distorted. The next day, our entire segment about the lights over the river was pulled from the station website. No explanation, no note, just removed. Ben told us to move on, said we were dropping the story. For a while, I did. We went back to covering weather reports and lost dogs, but small things started happening that I couldn't brush off. My car alarm would go off in the middle of the night. My mailbox would be half open in the morning, even when I hadn't used it. I started noticing a black sedan parked across the street. Then I'd been working remote, living in a small rental cabin near Oak Creek, just off one of those dirt roads where GPS barely works. It was a simple setup, one room, a wood stove and a tiny kitchen. Most evenings after work I'd spend hiking the canyons around Sedona, late August, around 8 p.m. The sun had dipped low, leaving that dry, cool, desert air. I was on my usual route along Cathedral Trail with my camera, shooting time-lapses of sunsets. Nothing professional, just a hobby. Halfway through the trail, there's a lookout point facing east across the canyon. That's when I saw it. At first, a single bright light moving too fast to be a plane, but too slow for a meteor. I thought maybe it was a drone, but it was flying way too high. The object changed direction 3 times in under a minute, moving in sharp, deliberate angles, like someone dragging a cursor across the sky. Then it stopped completely still for about 5 seconds before shooting straight upward and vanishing. Months earlier, I'd been working at a TV station. One night after midnight, I noticed a sedan parked under a streetlight outside my apartment. Its headlights flickered on, then off when I pulled in. I tried to dismiss my unease. A week later, I found an envelope on my desk. No name, no postage, just a plain white paper. Inside was a photo of me sitting behind the anchor desk, taken from behind a studio camera. The back read, "Do not record unauthorized subjects." I didn't show anyone. I just put the photo in my bag and left it. Soon after, I gave notice and moved out of state, telling everyone I wanted to change. But sometimes, I still wake at 6:12 a.m, the same time that segment aired, and my TV is on, filled with static, and I don't even have cable anymore. And waiting for something to show up, but the sky remained empty. Back at home, I transferred the clip to my laptop. The footage wasn't crystal clear, but the details were visible. That strange, precise movement caught my eye. I shared the video on a hiking forum I occasionally use, hoping someone might recognise it. I was careful to keep things anonymous. No full name or identifying details. Just a simple post. Saw this above Oak Creek tonight. Anyone know what it is? A few comments trickled in before I went to sleep. Most were jokes. Some suggested it might be a satellite flare or drone swarm. I didn't think much of it. The next morning around 7:30, a knock at the cabin door broke the silence. I hesitated to answer. No one ever visits out here. Packages get left at the gate and neighbours are non-existent. But the knocking persisted, steady and deliberate. When I opened the door, 2 men stood before me. Black suits, white shirts, black ties. They looked oddly out of place against the red dirt and sun-bleached trees. Their shoes were immaculate, not a speck of dust. The taller one greeted me with a smile. "Good morning, Mr. Heller. We're from the Department of Atmospheric Studies. Mind if we come in?" I was stunned. Heller was my last name, but I'd never used it online. I hadn't told anyone about the video except in that forum post. Asking how they found me, the shorter man explained tersely, "Your post was flagged for review, just conducting follow-up." His voice sounded mechanical, like he was reading from a prepared script. They didn't wait for an invitation, stepping inside with synchronized movements. One scanned the room, laptop, camera bag, unwashed dishes, while the other stood by the door, hands clasped. They wanted to see the footage. I agreed, thinking it couldn't do any harm. As I played the video, the tall man leaned in, watching intently. When the light shot upward and vanished, he paused, studying the frozen frame. "No ground reflection, no audible disturbance?" he asked. I confirmed. He nodded to his partner, muttering, "Local atmospheric inversion as expected." The shorter man acknowledged with a minimal nod. Carefully, almost reverently, the tall agent closed my laptop. "We'll be taking this for review," he announced. I protested, but he just smiled, that same tight, controlled smile. Gent I didn't argue when they told me to return something. Something about our interaction felt off. The atmosphere shifted, heavy and tense, without any direct threats. They thanked me for cooperating, turned and left. Their black sedan waited at the end of the dusty drive, pristine despite the surrounding terrain. They drove away slowly, leaving no trace in the sand. When I checked my watch, it had stopped. The second hand was frozen at 8:42, exactly the time I'd noticed the light vanish the night before. I tried winding it, shaking it, but nothing worked. Assuming it had died, I set it on the counter and forgot about it. The rest of that day felt strange. Phantom sounds haunted me. Cars outside, voices near the creek, but each time I investigated, nothing was there. That night, I discovered something else unsettling. The video file had vanished from my phone, not just deleted, but completely erased. The forum upload link was dead, and when I tried to open the post, only a blank page appeared. The next morning, I drove into town to check if the library computers had cached my forum post. Nothing remained. It was as if the content had never existed. When I returned home that afternoon, my laptop sat on the porch, wiped clean, with a fresh system install and an empty hard drive. I decided to avoid hiking for a while. 2 nights later, around 3 a.m, a peculiar sound woke me. A low, steady hum oscillated between an engine and a power line's drone. Looking out the window, I saw 2 faint figures standing silently on the trail behind my cabin. They didn't move, didn't turn, just stood motionless. After watching for a minute, the sound faded and they disappeared. The next morning I checked the trail. No footprints, no tyre marks. My watch had started ticking again, still showing 8:42, but now the date had reset to August 18th, 1 day earlier than the actual date. I stopped wearing it after that. A week later I mustered the courage for another hike. This time I brought a different camera unconnected to my phone or laptop. Halfway up the trail something caught my eye. A small black card, smooth and blank like a hotel key, half buried in the dirt. When I picked it up, it was warm to the touch. N and I left the canyon that morning before the sun had fully risen. Later that night, when I returned, the stove clock blinked 8:42, as if the power had gone out, except no other appliances seemed affected. Strange occurrences began to mount. My phone's location services would mysteriously activate on their own. The porch light flickered precisely 3 times each night around the same hour. One evening, driving back from town, I spotted a black sedan parked on the highway shoulder near my road's turnoff. Tinted windows concealed 2 motionless silhouettes facing straight ahead. A week later, a package arrived in my mailbox with no return address or postage. Opening it revealed my old watch, the one I'd left on the counter weeks earlier. Now it was ticking again, with the second hand moving backwards. I moved out of the cabin before the lease ended, abandoning most of my belongings. Camera, furniture, the laptop they'd returned, all left behind. I stopped hiking altogether. Months later, while staying with my sister near Flagstaff and helping with her children, something truly bizarre occurred. She called me to the living room asking about a UFO video I'd supposedly posted last summer. On her phone screen was my clip. Same canyon, same night sky, same darting light. But the narration wasn't mine. Someone else was describing the scene word for word exactly as I'd written in my original post. The upload date showed August 17th, 1 day before I even filmed the video. My research had begun in Cazenovia, a small upstate New York town. The local library, an older stone building with creaky floors and a constant dusty paper smell, was where I'd been investigating regional folklore for a podcast. It was late November, one of those grey afternoons that feels like perpetual dusk. While scrolling through microfilm from the Livingston County Press, 1952 to 1960, I discovered a small article about strange lights reported over Canaseraga in May 1954. The piece mentioned a farmer named Elmer Rhodes who had witnessed a bright orange object hovering above his field. My search began with neighbours talking about an odd buzzing sound. A few weeks later, a correction note caught my attention. Mr. Rhodes had apparently recanted his original statement. The wording seemed strangely forced. I dug deeper but found no additional mentions. Then, a month later, another small article appeared. It described a government inspection of the same farmland. 2 representatives had interviewed local residents and concluded no aerial phenomena existed. At the town library, I asked Patty about digitised police records. She couldn't help with that, but suggested checking the archives room. She guided me through a narrow hallway behind frosted glass doors, lined with filing cabinets and fluorescent lights that hummed softly. I spent an hour scanning handwritten reports from the 1950s. Most entries were routine. Livestock complaints, vandalism, noise issues. Suddenly, a report from May 12, 1954 stopped me. It described unidentified lights near West Ridge, close to Rhodes' property. The report ended abruptly, mid-sentence. Subject interviewed by Federal. And then nothing. A faint sound of footsteps broke my concentration. Turning around, I expected Patty. Instead, 2 tall, pale men in identical black suits stood in the doorway. No coats, despite the cold. The one on the left spoke first. His voice was clear but strange, each word carefully selected. "Why are you looking into what does not exist?" His companion repeated the exact same phrase, with identical cadence. Their delivery was flat, like a teleprompter reading. When I asked about their affiliation, the taller man tilted his head mechanically and said, "We are only observers." I attempted to lighten the mood with a nervous laugh. Observers from where? They smiled simultaneously, not similar smiles, but the exact same smile. Lips moving in perfect sync, teeth showing at the same angle. It was like watching a reflection, except they weren't identical. Non noticed something odd in the library archive hallway. 2 men in suits stood perfectly still, their expressions matching exactly. They didn't blink. A weird pressure started building in my ears like before a thunderstorm. The fluorescent lights hummed louder, vibrating through the floor. I mentioned something about talking to the librarian if they were with an agency. Without hesitation, they turned simultaneously and walked out. By the time I entered the main library room, they had vanished. The glass front doors were still swinging slightly. Patty looked up from her desk when I asked if she'd seen 2 men walk out. "No, just you," she said. I explained there had been 2 guys in suits in the archive hallway. She seemed confused, stating the only other person in the building that day was her assistant, who'd left an hour earlier. Outside in the parking lot, I stood examining the scene. The only other car was an old beige Buick that had been there when I arrived. Something felt off. It wasn't just quiet, it was too quiet. The kind of silence that makes your brain strain for any background noise. Even the wind had stopped. I got in my car, hoping to hear something normal. In the rearview mirror for a split second, I thought I saw them standing at the far end of the lot, 2 dark shapes near the edge of the trees. But when I turned around, nothing was there. I told myself it was a trick of the light. At home that night, I pulled out the microfilm printouts from earlier. The second article about the government inspection had completely smudged, just a blank rectangle where text had been. The farmer's report remained legible, but now a faint shadow printed across it looked like a reflection of a face, with 2 blurred ovals where eyes would be. The next day I returned to ask Patty about the men. She hadn't seen them again, but mentioned something strange. Someone had come in right after I left asking for the same microfilm reels. When I inquired about their appearance, she said she hadn't looked up, only noting they sounded odd, like speaking through a speakerphone. Checking the cabinet, Patty frowned and said the entire box was gone. A week later, I started noticing a black sedan parked across from my apartment. No specific times defined my routine, but there was a deliberate pattern. I'd pass by the car, sometimes morning, sometimes after dark. No front plates, windows tinted. Around 9 p.m, walking to take out the trash, I caught a glimpse through the windshield. 2 figures sat motionless inside. As I stepped closer, the engine started silently, and the car pulled away unhurriedly. After that, my curtains stayed closed. 2 nights later, a soft knock interrupted my night. 3 gentle taps. Peering through the peephole revealed nothing. I didn't open the door. The next morning a folded paper appeared on my welcome mat. No handwriting, just a printed phrase in capital letters. There is nothing to find. That same day, strange disruptions began. My university library access card stopped working. The admin office claimed temporary deactivation pending verification, offering no explanation. My podcast email account became inaccessible. Password invalid. Recovery number changed to an unfamiliar number. Paranoia crept in. Had I unknowingly done something illegal? I called the local police station, asking if any complaints were filed against me. The officer's response was cryptic. "You're not the first to ask that recently." Weeks later, I drove to Colonia seeking clarity. The library stood closed, its windows covered in brown paper. That night, an unexpected voicemail arrived from an unknown number. A clear male voice stated, "Mr. Heller, you're no longer required to continue your research. We appreciate your attention." Silence followed, then the line disconnected. When I tried to replay the message later, it had vanished. Not deleted, completely gone. My phone log showed no record of the call. Months passed. Normalcy returned. I moved, changed contact information, and told no one about the incident. Then, while sorting old papers, I discovered a library receipt slip I didn't remember keeping. The timestamp read November 8th, 4:13 p.m, the day I was in Colonia. Under checked out was a single title, Atmospheric Studies Volume 3. I had no recollection of this book. Beneath the title, carefully written in small letters, were librarian initials. Jessica and I started a podcast during the pandemic called Open Skies Radio. It was just me talking with people about weird experiences, UFOs, strange lights, military cover-ups. I never expected much, but by last year I had a small following of a few thousand regular listeners. This modest audience was enough to attract some interesting guests like Raymond, a retired Air Force mechanic. He'd worked at Wright, Pat in the late 80s, and claimed he saw something unusual stored in a hangar, something that wasn't an aircraft. When he described it, his voice shook with a mix of fear and uncertainty. The episode went live on a Thursday. By Saturday, the download numbers were higher than anything I'd ever posted before. That same night, around 11:40, while editing another show, I received a call on an unknown line. I almost ignored it, but was expecting my co-host about scheduling, so I picked up. There was only a faint background hiss at first. Then a man's voice came through, flat, deep, and slow. "Stop discussing that subject," he said. I thought it was a prank and asked, "Who is this?" Another pause followed by a simple, "Stop now." I laughed nervously, but the caller didn't say anything else. After about 20 seconds, I hung up. When I checked my phone log, something was off. No number, no call duration, just a blank spot. Redialing produced nothing. Minutes later, my studio lights flickered. Working in my apartment's spare bedroom with a condenser mic mixer and older Dell laptop, I noticed the lights dimming twice like a brownout. The laptop fan revved up randomly and the mouse froze momentarily. I tried convincing myself it was just a voltage dip, something that happens when the heat kicks on. But when I returned to editing Raymond's recording, a faint noise appeared underneath his voice. It wasn't feedback or white noise, but something more like whispering. Initially I thought it might be my own voice bleeding from another track. However, when I isolated the file, the sound remained, right beneath the audio floor. It almost sounded like words, just too quiet to understand. Unsettled, I texted my co-host Eric that something weird was happening. Dentist and I noticed something strange after recording audio at the radio station. The raw file on my SD card had an odd noise, but I brushed it off as a technical glitch. The next morning my laptop was acting weird, the fan running full blast with the lid closed and a faint screen glow. When I opened it, dozens of media player windows were simultaneously playing my past month's audio recordings. Each file had a low, overlapping static whisper with an unsettling, pulsing rhythm. I quickly shut the lid and unplugged everything. At work, I casually mentioned the call to my boss, joking about potential Men in Black threats. He didn't laugh, instead warning me cryptically, "Maybe don't poke around that stuff too much." I later learned he'd previously worked at the same Air Force base as Raymond. That evening, a pristine black sedan parked across from my building, unusual for my quiet, dead-end street populated mostly by retirees. The car had tinted windows, two men in black suits sitting motionless, and notably no front license plates, which stood out in Ohio. Around 9 p.m, someone knocked. Through the peephole, I saw two suited men, one tall and clean-shaven, the other short and bald. The taller one spoke with an unnaturally mechanical tone, asking about a specific recording. When I demanded identification, he flashed a badge, though I couldn't distinguish its details. The shorter agent claimed they represented an agency monitoring false information, smiling in a way that didn't reach his eyes. Their final statement chilled me. "You've been warned once." I wasn't letting them in without proper credentials. Later, the sedan mysteriously vanished after I'd briefly stepped away, leaving me deeply unsettled about what was happening. I didn't tell anyone about the phone call except Eric and my boss. I said, "You need to leave." The two men looked at each other, then both smiled in perfect synchronization. Their movements were identical, almost rehearsed. Without another word, they turned and walked down the hall. I listened as their footsteps faded down the stairwell. Peeking out the window again, I saw the black sedan parked on the street. Its tinted windows prevented me from seeing inside. I called Eric, who told me to grab my stuff and stay at his place for the night. I packed my laptop, hard drives and a backpack. But when I tried to export my project files, the computer froze. The screen turned black, displaying a single line of text: "Stop." I powered it down and left for Eric's place in Huber Heights. During the drive, I noticed headlights in my rearview mirror several times. They maintained the same spacing and brightness. When I changed lanes, they followed suit. I made random turns off the main road, but the car maintained its distance, never speeding up or falling behind. As I pulled into Eric's driveway, the headlights slowed and turned off about a block away. I ran inside. Eric thought I was exaggerating until we went outside together 10 minutes later. The street was quiet, suburban, dark and empty. We spent the night trying to recover my files on his computer. Dozens of interview hours had been replaced with static. Some clips contained low, garbled voice fragments. Attempting to boost the audio caused the waveforms to flatten, as if deliberately erased. Around 3 a.m, Eric's power flickered. His router reset, and an unknown notification made his phone freeze. He suggested the light rain might be causing interference, but the timing seemed too precise. The next morning, driving home, the black sedan was gone. 2 wet boot prints stood side by side on my front door mat, perfectly even. No muddy trail led to or from them. I threw the mat away. For a week, my sleep was disrupted. My phone would ring once or twice nightly, always showing an unknown number. When answered, silence greeted me. Twice, my mail was tampered with. Letters opened and resealed. I stopped the podcast soon after, telling listeners I was taking a break for personal reasons. About a month later, I checked a forgotten backup cloud folder. The file names were intact, but something felt off. Edanan, when I first noticed the tracks, I was heading out to feed the cattle on a foggy March morning just like any other day. My place sits about 15 miles east of Springfield, Missouri, 120 acres of mixed pasture and woods. I've lived here most of my life, inheriting the land from my dad. Nothing much ever happens out here except the occasional coyote or drunk teenager knocking down a fence post. The night before, there had been some talk around town about lights over the ridge. A few folks said they saw bright flashes near Route D, white and green, silent and moving too fast to be a plane. I didn't see anything myself. When I went out to check the barn around 10, the sky had this dull glow, like lightning behind clouds, except there wasn't any storm. That morning the fog was thick, hanging low over the field. When I came around the side of the barn, I saw the tracks. They weren't mine. I drive an old Silverado, and these were way narrower with a deep, clean tread like a government SUV. They came in off the back road, cut straight across the north pasture, and stopped near the fence line that backs up to the creek. I followed the tracks out, thinking maybe a delivery truck had gotten turned around. But the grass out there is soft this time of year, and I could tell by the marks the vehicle must have come through late at night. The ground was still wet and shiny where the tyres had pressed down. That's when I saw them. 2 men standing by the fence, both wearing black suits, white shirts, black ties. The fog made them look out of place, like cutouts pasted onto the scene. They had what looked like metal rods or tools, maybe a foot long, and were crouched down, poking at the soil. I stopped about 30 yards away and called out, "Morning, can I help you with something?" Both of them turned at the same time, not startled, just synchronized. One of them, a tall guy with pale skin and slick back hair, stood up straight and held a small metal case in front of him. "Good morning, sir. We're with the Department of Agriculture," he said. His voice was deep, almost too even, like he'd practiced the line. Later, when I tried to download their information, they all came through blank, just 0-byte placeholders. The only thing left was one 5-second clip labelled intro.wave. It was just static, then a voice saying my name in that same flat tone. That's when I noticed something else. My phone's clock was off by exactly 13 minutes, and when I reset it, it jumped back again, right to the timestamp of that first call. 2 men showed up on my land claiming to be from the Department of Agriculture. They were collecting environmental samples, but something felt off. Neither wore visible badges and their vehicle was nowhere in sight, just tracks leading to where they stood. I told them I'd need to call the sheriff before letting anyone take samples from my property. The taller one smiled, but it wasn't a genuine smile. His mouth moved, but the rest of his face remained stiff. Then he said my name, Mr. Rains. That caught my attention because I hadn't introduced myself, and my mailbox is half a mile up the main road. The shorter man stepped forward slightly. "We're aware of your property," he said. "We'll only be a moment longer." He crouched and pressed a metal rod into the ground, which made a faint humming sound like a power line in the wind. I decided to go inside and call Sheriff Malone. If they were legitimate, no harm done. If not, someone needed to check them out. When I glanced back during my walk to the house, both men were still there. One crouched, one standing perfectly still, watching me leave. Dispatch told me the sheriff was on another call but would be here in about 15 minutes. When I went back outside, the fog had lifted. The pasture was empty. No men, no vehicle, just wind through the trees. I walked back to where they'd been standing. Their tyre tracks ended right at the fence and didn't continue. No footprints, no sign of their departure. Kneeling where they'd taken samples, I noticed the ground was bone dry, unusually so, especially compared to the morning dew covering everything else. Sheriff Therup Malone arrived in his cruiser, a good man with 30 years of county service. I told him everything I'd seen. He walked along the tracks, stopping midway and frowning. Something wasn't right. The Prince's tracks didn't connect to the road. They simply disappeared into the grass, as if the vehicle had lifted off the ground entirely. When he asked me about the men in suits and their tools, I described the metal rods I'd seen. He surveyed the area, hands on his hips, remarking, "Well, they sure left in a hurry." Then he gave me a look that suggested he was holding back what he really thought. He wanted to know if I'd seen which direction they went. I confirmed I hadn't. He shrugged, saying he'd make a note, but there wasn't much else to do. That afternoon, I returned with a shovel to investigate the soil. A few inches down, I hit something hard and smooth, metallic. It was small, maybe credit card sized, and buried perfectly level. When I pulled it up, it wasn't machinery or scrap metal. Instead, it looked like brushed silver. No markings, no seams, just a perfectly smooth, cold rectangle. Inside, my radio started hissing with static. No matter what station I tuned to, there was the same soft hiss with faint popping sounds. When I set the metal piece down, the static stopped. Picking it up made it start again. By sunset, I'd convinced myself it was nothing special, probably a sensor or utility company equipment. I stored it in my shed and tried to forget about it. Around midnight, my dog began barking frantically. Looking out the back window, I saw a pale white light gliding low over the pasture. It wasn't a spotlight, just a silent, smooth glow that vanished after a few seconds. The next morning I discovered the shed's padlock hanging open. The metal piece was gone, with no footprints, not even mine. I was certain I'd locked it. When the sheriff followed up, I explained about the missing object. He wrote some notes and said he'd check with local utility offices. 2 days later, he called to say no agency had been in the area that week. About a month afterward, we ran into each other at the feed store. Casually, he mentioned that someone from the state had been asking questions. Then Tuesday evening in early November, the Route 217 bus from downtown Portland to Tigard was half full. Darkness had settled early, that heavy kind of darkness when the air smells like rain and everything feels half asleep. A couple high school kids, an older woman with groceries, and a guy in a construction vest were scattered among the passengers. I was sitting with my earbuds in, not really listening to anything. As we passed the trees near Phono Creek, I looked out the window and saw something strange. A light moved above the tree line, smaller and closer than a plane or helicopter, maybe a couple 100 feet up. No sound, no flashing markers. It darted left, stopped, then shot straight up like yanked on a string. For 3 seconds it hung there, then went out completely, as if someone flipped a switch. Other passengers noticed too. The older woman leaned closer to the window. The guy in the vest pointed and said something to the driver, who didn't even slow down. Nobody spoke much after that. The next morning was grey and wet, typical Oregon winter weather. I took the same bus at the same time. When I boarded, 2 men were sitting together near the back. Both wore black suits with black ties and white shirts. No coats, no rain jackets, no hats, no umbrellas, no briefcases. They had pale skin, short dark hair, and an identical build. Average but stiff, like they weren't used to sitting still. At first I thought they might be co-workers or detectives, but something felt off about them. Later someone had stopped by the station asking about the incident. 2 men were reportedly checking up on the report. He couldn't remember their names. When asked what they looked like, he thought for a moment and said they were both wearing black suits. Interestingly, they didn't drive up. They were already waiting in the parking lot when he returned from lunch. He didn't say much else after that. Since then, no strange lights have appeared, and no new tracks mark the pasture. But sometimes, in the early morning when fog still hangs low, faint lines seem pressed into the grass by the fence, as if something heavy once sat there and vanished without leaving a trace. Non and 2 men sat in the back of the bus, their suits pressed too perfectly, collars slightly askew. They stared straight ahead, unmoving, fixed on a point near the front. I was seated a few rows ahead, trying not to draw attention. Each time I glanced back, they remained exactly the same. No movement, no phone checking, no acknowledgement of their surroundings. When passengers boarded or exited, they didn't turn their heads or blink. I wondered if they might be part of some performance art or undercover transit security, but nothing about them suggested official status. As the bus reached my stop by the hospital, I stood to leave. Passing them, I noticed their identical black shoes, polished, pristine, without any visible brand or distinctive markings. Only after stepping off did I realise they had risen too. Through the window, I saw them standing in the aisle, facing the door, perfectly still. Walking toward work, I suddenly heard the bus pulling away, then footsteps, slow, steady, keeping pace about half a block behind me. A quick turn revealed nothing. The sidewalk was empty. That entire day felt strange. Each time the office door opened, I half expected to see them enter. That evening I took an Uber home, offering rain as my excuse. At my stop, 2 black sedans sat 50 feet apart on opposite sides of the street, engines running, headlights on. No occupants were visible. I locked my door and sat in darkness. The next morning I convinced myself I'd imagined everything. Taking a later bus, I hoped the timing would be different, but there they were again. Same row, same seats, same suits. I froze before boarding, the driver's impatient look forcing me to sit midway. The men remained motionless, looking at neither me nor anyone else. 10 minutes into the ride, as the bus stopped at a construction zone, I glanced back. Their heads had turned slightly. I stepped back from the bus, my heart racing, as 2 strangers sat in the back with identical suits and blank faces. This wasn't the first time I'd noticed them. Earlier they had turned slightly toward me on my previous bus ride, moving in perfect unison, their angles matching precisely. When the light changed, they faced forward again, and no one else seemed to notice. After getting off at my stop, I walked quickly toward the corner, wanting to turn and check if they were following, but afraid of making my suspicion obvious. At the next crosswalk, I glanced over my shoulder. They were gone. The bus pulled away and I scanned the area, sidewalks, shops, parking lot, but found nothing. Strange occurrences began shortly after. One morning my back gate was unlocked, though I always kept it secured. Another night, my motion sensor light flickered repeatedly with no wind or movement. Then, a plain white business card appeared tucked into my front door's crack, just a local phone number printed in black ink. I didn't call. Instead, I threw it away and tried to forget. 2 nights later, someone knocked. 3 sharp raps. Looking through the peephole revealed nothing. No one was there. The street was quiet, but as I turned away, I caught a faint reflection of headlights moving slowly past my house, pausing briefly before driving off. I started sleeping with the lights on. A week later, waiting for the bus in thick morning fog, I spotted those same two figures in the back. This time, I deliberately stepped back, pretending to check my phone, and let the bus leave without me. The driver honked in frustration, but I couldn't move. I walked home that day. No cars followed, no strange notes, no knocks, just silence. Since then, I've changed my routine. I drive more often now and haven't seen them again, but at stoplights I still check my rearview mirror, half expecting to see those expressionless faces waiting. Sometimes, when fog rolls in, I find myself staring at the tree line along 19 Niemald, watching for a darting light. It never appears, but I can't stop looking. It was just after sunset when I was driving out to the old Watkins airstrip, one of those tiny, forgotten private runways. Just Ione was cruising northeast of Sedalia, Missouri that night to take pictures for a small aviation blog. Just another routine gig capturing airfields. The March sky was crystal clear, with cold air that made the wind feel razor-sharp against my skin. When I pulled onto the gravel driveway leading to the strip, something caught my eye hovering at the far end of the tarmac. At first, I thought it might be a crop duster pilot practicing manoeuvres. But there was absolute silence. No engine hum, no sound at all. The object looked strange, dark and angular, roughly the size of a Cessna. It remained perfectly still. No navigation lights, nothing typical of aircraft. I sat in my truck, trying to rationalise it as a weather balloon or some optical illusion. Then it moved deliberately, sliding parallel to the runway before vanishing behind trees at the property's edge. I called the Sedalia police non-emergency line to report what I'd seen. The dispatcher was polite but clearly sceptical. I described the location, the object's behaviour, and its silent hovering. She said someone would note the report, and that was that. The next morning, driving to my IT job at a small insurance office in Jefferson City, something else strange occurred. About halfway there, I noticed a black sedan on the highway's opposite side, maintaining exactly a quarter-mile distance behind me. When I changed lanes, it matched precisely. Then another black sedan appeared, trailing me in a different lane with identical spacing. I tried various tactics, slowing down, speeding up, even taking a detour through a side road. Both cars remained behind me, never turning their heads, never signalling, just moving. Nervous, I called my office and told a co-worker I might be late, trying to sound calm. The cars followed until I pulled into the parking lot. They stopped at the lot's end, engines idling, then slowly drove away parallel to the other vehicles, never looking at anyone else. Throughout the day, I found myself constantly glancing out the window, checking the lot and street, unable to shake an unsettling feeling. The road back was dark, mostly empty, with just a few farmhouses and deer grazing near field edges. Something had fundamentally changed, though I couldn't quite explain what. In yen I drove, home a different route just to be cautious. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary on that quiet suburban street. No cars, no one watching. About 10 miles from my house, a piece of paper caught my eye, tucked under the windshield wiper of my truck. I pulled over and unfolded it. 4 words in all caps stared back at me. You didn't see anything. No signature, nothing else. My hands trembled as I read the note. I scanned the empty street. Dark houses, no movement. After shoving the paper in my pocket, I drove home and locked the doors behind me. That night I parked my truck in the garage and couldn't sleep. Black sedans kept spinning through my thoughts. The drivers had seemed so strange, never looking, always knowing I'd called the police. Around 2 a.m, I thought I heard tyres on gravel. Peering out the window, I saw nothing. Just a faint impression of headlights on the garage door, vanishing when I blinked. I tried rationalising everything. Maybe this was government surveillance or local law enforcement taking my report seriously, but there was no badge, no identification, just those 2 cars and that cryptic note. Why warn me after the fact instead of confronting me directly? The next morning I drove past the airstrip on my way to work. Cracked asphalt, sagging hangars, broken fencing, no trace of the object. I checked surrounding fields for tyre tracks or footprints. Nothing seemed out of place. Over the next few days I remained vigilant. No cars followed me, No more notes arrived, but I found myself watching the sky at dusk, parking under streetlights, driving slower to scan for any potential followers. A week later, I bumped into a retired sheriff at the hardware store. Casually, I asked if anyone had ever reported seeing strange aircraft over the Watkins Strip. He paused, then replied, "Funny you should ask. A few years back, we had some calls from around here. Nothing ever confirmed." He didn't press me for details, just moved on to the nails and screws. I haven't returned to the airstrip since. Sometimes at night, I still watch the sky, thinking about that hovering thing. The sedans never reappeared, but I can't forget the drivers, their unnatural stillness, how they never turned or reacted as if moving through their own separate reality. That note haunts me. Who left it? Why me? And why? The day I drove to Glay, Colorado started like any other research trip. Late September, just after Labor Day weekend, I was pursuing a lead on an old UFO sighting from the 70s. My podcast with friends often explored weird local history, missing planes, unexplained lights, those kinds of stories. I wasn't an expert, but I loved collecting strange inquiries. Earlier that week, I'd been digging through university library newspapers, preparing to meet a retired rancher who'd reported strange lights over his fields decades ago. I stopped at Penny's Place, a small diner off the highway, one of those square buildings with a faded neon, sign and cracked asphalt parking lot wedged between a feed store and a closed gas station. The morning was grey and misty, cold enough that interior windows fogged up. Inside, 4 people occupied the space. 2 truckers at the counter, a couple in a corner booth, and Darla, the middle-aged waitress who kept refilling coffee without asking. I settled into a window booth and spread out my notes. Old photocopies of newspaper clippings about the Sterling Light, a silver disc reportedly hovering over a wheat field for nearly an hour before vanishing. Midway through a cold omelette, something shifted. The way I'd describe what happened next carried a careful certainty, the kind that implies knowing something others shouldn't hear about. Now, months later, I still drive past that road stretch, usually during daylight, keeping to myself. No lights, no sedans, nothing. Just cracked asphalt, hangars, and wind in the trees. The experience hasn't stopped my drone flights or abandoned airstrip photography for my blog, but I'm more cautious now. I watch the rearview mirror and avoid calling police about weird lights whenever possible. Even with clear skies and bright stars, I find myself scanning for shapes, for movement. Sometimes just at my vision's edge, I think I see a dark shape moving silently along the horizon. I look directly, and it's gone. Yet the memory of those sedans and that note remains, like I never really left. And 2 men entered the room, their appearance striking and unusual. Black suits, crisp white shirts, no ties, and hats kept firmly on, even indoors. Their clothing looked impossibly pristine, as if freshly plucked from a store window without a single wrinkle. One was pale, seemingly in his mid-40s, with slick dark hair. The other appeared older, but with an unsettling skin texture. Smooth, yet stretched, almost waxy. They approached my booth with unnerving precision, moving in perfect synchronization. "Mr. Halverson?" the pale one asked. The name caught me off guard, as I hadn't used it for my podcast or online work. I nodded anyway. "Yeah, that's me." "May we sit?" said the other, his voice carrying a strange, flat metallic tone. Not robotic, but like someone who'd learned English from an audiobook. They slid into the booth opposite me, their movements crisp and identical. I tried to remain calm, gathering my papers, but something about their simultaneous matching smiles made my stomach twist. "You've been researching incidents," the older one stated, barely blinking. "Specifically, aerial phenomena," I confirmed slowly, explaining it was mostly public records and old cases shared through my podcast. They tilted their heads in perfect unison, like birds responding to a distant sound. The pale one retrieved a small notebook, flipping it open. "What do you intend to do with that story?" he asked. I shrugged, explaining I planned to talk to someone and potentially record the interview. Their eyes remained unnervingly still as they spoke. The older one smiled again, and this time I noticed his lips were slightly out of sync with his words, subtly off, like bad dubbing in a movie. "You should consider discontinuing your work," he advised, "for your own well-being." The pale one added that examining non-existent things wasn't productive. I laughed, thinking this might be a prank from local skeptics. but their expressions didn't change. "Who are you with?" I asked. Once more they moved in perfect mirror image, then smiled, wide identical grins that didn't reach their eyes. "We're with an oversight department," the older one said. When I pressed for specifics, they remained silent. Instead, they stood simultaneously, smoothed their jackets and walked out. No explanation, no goodbye, no hesitation. I was at the diner sitting alone, and something strange happened. My papers were spread out on the table, and I caught Darla's attention as she wiped down the coffee pot. "You look like you've seen a ghost," she said, noticing my unease. I told her about 2 men in black suits who had been sitting with me moments ago, but when I turned to point them out, the booth was empty. My half-eaten omelette remained, along with my coffee and papers, but only one mug was present. Darla insisted I'd been sitting alone since arriving. Something didn't feel right. I remembered their odd characteristics. No discernible smell, clothes that didn't crease when they sat. When I left the diner, the parking lot was nearly empty. My truck stood alone, except for an abandoned old Ford. No black sedan, no sign of anyone leaving. As I drove, I kept checking my mirrors. About 10 miles down the highway, the dark vehicle followed me. Maybe black, maybe dark blue, hard to tell through the mist. It maintained a steady distance for several miles before turning away when I headed toward the rancher's place. The interview with Frank Leary felt off from the start. He was jumpy, constantly glancing at the windows. When I mentioned eating breakfast at Penny's, he froze. "They still open that place?" he asked. I confirmed I'd been there that morning. He then asked if I'd seen anyone in suits, which made my chest tighten. Leaving just after sunset, I noticed the air growing colder with fog settling low over the road. My phone lost service near the county line. I kept checking the rearview mirror, but nothing followed. Back at the motel that night, I reviewed the audio from my meeting with Frank. Most was clear, but towards the end, when we discussed the diner, a low rhythmic hum filled the background. Not static, but almost like breathing close to the microphone. Something was definitely not right. When I tried to replay the recording from the diner where I talked to the 2 men, nothing happened. The recorder wasn't even on, though I was certain I'd turned it on. The next morning, I discovered Penny's place was closed. A handwritten sign hung on the door reading, "Closed until further. Notice." Tight blinds blocked any view inside, and no cars sat out front. I called the number from the previous day's receipt, disconnected. The notebook they'd looked at wasn't mine. The pale man must have left it on the table. It was a plain black notebook with no writing or logo. Only one page contained text. A single phrase neatly written on the first page. "Do not speak of what's seen." I'm unsure how it ended up in my papers or why I didn't notice it earlier that night. What I do know is that I stopped working on the Sterling Light story after that. I came home exhausted and anxious that night. The first thing I noticed was my front door, unlocked. I live alone in a small bungalow on Cedar Hill's outskirts and always check my locks carefully. My mind raced. No way, I locked it. Pushing the door open cautiously, I noticed a faint smoke smell. Different from my wood stove, more like something had briefly burned. My heart raced. I grabbed the baseball bat near the coat rack and moved through the living room toward the kitchen. A single notebook page sat on the counter, edges smouldering and curling inward. At first, I couldn't comprehend what I was seeing. It was a sketch I'd drawn earlier, a quick diagram of strange lights people had reported over the old quarry. I'd been documenting witness accounts, times, and rough diagrams. Somehow this one sheet had been set ablaze, yet nothing else in the kitchen showed damage. I checked the counters and floor, no ash marks beyond the page itself. I froze, half expecting someone to emerge from the shadows, but the place remained eerily quiet. My phone sat on the charger. No missed calls, no messages. I snapped a picture of the page, then carried the smouldering sheet to the sink and soaked it. I called my neighbour Marty to ask if he'd seen anyone around. "Nah," he said, "you're imagining things." But even as I listened, I knew I wasn't imagining anything. Something had definitely been here. The night was tense. I couldn't stop moving, checking every entrance repeatedly. Doors, windows, nothing felt secure. My nerves were on high alert. When the soft knock came at 1:30 a.m, it wasn't like a typical neighbour's tap. This was different, deliberate, measured. Peering through the peephole, I saw two men standing outside. They were sharply dressed. Black suits, black overcoats, thin and precise. One held a clipboard, the other remained perfectly still, hands clasped. No second knock came, no word spoken. I cracked the door open. "Can I help you, Miss Halden?" The clipboard man's voice was eerily flat, like someone reading from a prepared text. "Yes," I managed to reply, my throat tight. "We're from the Historical Preservation Office," the second man said, offering a smile that never reached his eyes. When I looked confused, he tilted his head slightly, almost childlike. "We're concerned about preserving local history of certain events." Events? My mind raced. They wanted to ask about lights, specifically lights I'd seen. I nodded, explaining how I documented sightings in my notebooks. Their precise questions felt rehearsed. "Have you ever seen lights that make no sound?" The exact phrasing sent a chill down my spine. They were interested in my recordings, times, patterns. Some lights moved too quickly to be conventional aircraft. As they spoke, I noticed something unsettling. Their lips seemed slightly out of sync with their words, as if reciting memorized lines. "May we see your notes?" first man asked. Something inside me resisted. I couldn't explain why, but sharing felt wrong. "They are important for historical record," he insisted. "We must ensure accuracy." How did they find me? I told no one my address. The second man's response was cryptic. "Sometimes people share more than they realise, and we must protect the record." Somehow, I found myself letting them inside. Janestia standing there, my front yard filled with low-hanging fog, I stared at the closed door. They had appeared and vanished without a trace. No footprints, no parked car nearby. Just silence. Earlier, two men had come to my house, their movements precise and synchronized. They examined my notebooks carefully, pages filled with witness accounts and sketches of unexplained sightings. Their lips moved out of sync with their murmured words, and I struggled to focus, my attention drawn to a burned page on the counter. "How long have you been documenting?" one asked. I replied I'd been tracking for several months, trying to correlate times and locations. People often report similar phenomena over extended periods. When he questioned whether certain events were meant to be observed, I was confused. "That is not for us to say," he responded. The pair exchanged a glance so identical it seemed rehearsed. Without warning, they returned my notebooks to the table, closed the door meticulously, and left. No discussion of payment, no further inquiries, just an abrupt departure. Hours later, strange details emerged. My phone showed several missed calls from blocked numbers, each voicemail blank. The security camera footage was equally bizarre. A normal empty driveway that suddenly skipped 10 minutes, resuming with no indication of the visitors. That night, I remained awake, notebook in hand, jumping at every small sound. The heater hummed continuously, and the air felt unnaturally cold. When morning arrived, everything seemed normal. I locked the doors twice and decided to install additional cameras. I still carry that notebook, often wondering how they found me, why a specific page was burned, and what they meant about soundless lights. I've shared fragments of the story with friends, presenting it as a strange coincidence. Yet something fundamental remains unsettled, a persistent unanswered question that lingers just beyond understanding. The road through southern Kansas stretches endlessly, a ribbon of asphalt cutting through wheat fields and occasional farmhouses. Late February brought a cold, clear day as I drove my familiar route from Wichita to Dodge City. No streetlights, no traffic, just long, straight paths and wind sweeping across the plains. I pulled over on K156 to stretch my legs, parking on the shoulder with the engine off. The heater lingered warmly inside the truck, and the radio was silent except for the faint rustle of wind through dead wheat. A quick nap seemed perfect, and I must have dozed for about 20 minutes. When I woke, darkness had completely swallowed the landscape. Suddenly a blinding white flash exploded, like a camera firing directly into my eyes. It lit up the entire truck cab, and for a moment I thought my vision was destroyed. Heart racing, I sat up and scanned the sky. Nothing moved. Just empty darkness and silent fields stretched before me. As I tried to rationalise the light as lightning or a satellite flare, something else caught my attention. Headlights. A black car idled precisely 20 feet behind my truck. No movement, no brake lights, just fixed beams cutting through the darkness. Unnerved, I rolled down the window and called out, hoping for some explanation. Silence answered. No engine noise, no response. When I reached for my phone to call 911, panic set in. No signal, no bars. I toggled settings, tried different networks. Nothing worked. Shivering, I stepped out of the truck and approached the car cautiously. "Hello, are you okay?" The headlights remained steady, the car unnaturally still. I blinked, and in that brief moment the car vanished. Not driving away, not pulling onto the road, simply gone. Those men with their synchronized smiles, their lips not quite matching their words, now haunt my memories. Whenever a faint hum echoes through the house at night, I think of them standing silently in my kitchen, watching, and I realise I may never understand why they came. Then I sat in the truck's cab, hands tight around the steering wheel, heart hammering, watching the empty road. When the phone finally showed signal again, something felt off. The battery indicator had dropped a couple of bars instantly, like it had been reconnecting to a network that didn't exist before. Messages had piled up, mostly app notifications, nothing urgent. But the weirdest thing was my GPS location. It showed me logged about 2 miles down the road, even though I hadn't moved the truck. I drove slowly, eyes flicking over the shoulder mirrors across the fields. Nothing. No sign of the car, no headlights, no tracks on the shoulder. The asphalt was completely undisturbed. I called Steve, a friend who lived just outside Dodge City. He picked up after a few rings, and I asked if there had been any news of strange lights or crashes. He laughed, saying it was just the usual boring February sky. I didn't tell him everything, just mentioned seeing a weird flash. He asked if I was okay, and I said yes, even though my stomach felt tight and my fingers were cold from adrenaline. By the time I reached my motel, the road behind me was empty and the night quiet. I checked the security camera footage from the front entrance. Nothing unusual, just late-night traffic. A semi that passed around 10:15 and a lone sedan that parked in the back lot about 20 minutes after I'd passed. I couldn't shake the feeling that the black car had been real. I'd seen it. Someone or something had been watching. I replayed the flash in my head repeatedly, trying to remember every detail, the whiteness, how it lit up the cab, how it felt like a physical weight pressing against my chest. That night, sleep was impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw headlights through the fog and felt the hum of an engine idling close behind. I kept the door locked and the TV on, volume low, just enough to hear background noise. The next day I drove the same route back toward Wichita. Everything seemed normal, but the memory lingered. My knees had wobbled a little earlier and I'd stumbled back to the truck, gripping the door handle for support. The radio static had kicked in suddenly, a low hiss that made the hair on my arm stand up. I'd tried the phone. Nothing. I jumped forward almost 45 minutes. I couldn't explain it. I didn't get out or walk around. I just sat there. Nye was shoveling the driveway after the first heavy snow of the season. The air was dry and biting cold, making my cheeks sting. Just as I was about to go inside, a flash burst out of nowhere, sharp and almost neon, lighting up the entire backyard. It lasted only a second, but everything became brighter than midday. Snow glittered as if I'd dumped 1,000 flashlights over it. I stood frozen, shovel gripped tightly in both hands. The air smelled like ozone, similar to the moment right before a thunderstorm, even though not a single cloud hung in the sky. I scanned the yard carefully. No sound, no movement, just untouched snow and the tracks I'd made an hour earlier. When I went inside and flipped the kitchen light, nothing happened. Not even a flicker. Every breaker and lamp was dead. I checked the fuse box, but nothing was tripped. I tried calling my neighbour Tom, but couldn't get a dial tone. My phone showed full bars, yet said no service. Settling onto the couch with a blanket, I tried convincing myself it was just a blown transformer. I tested the stove, microwave and water heater, all silent. Even the microwave clock had gone dark. I'm not sure how long I sat there staring at nothing while the wind rattled the windows and the house groaned under the snow's weight. About 2 hours later, everything came back on at once. Lights, fridge, TV. A week later, I was telling a coworker about the incident over coffee. She asked if I'd gotten any footage from my phone. I hadn't. When I checked, there was no video, no pictures, nothing from the time of the flash. Just normal photos I'd taken earlier that afternoon. It was like the event had been erased, except in my memory. I've driven that road a few more times since, always during the day. I never see anything, never get that sense of being followed, but I still think about it. The flash, the lost time. Sometimes when the sky's clear and the stars are sharp, I swear I can see a glow moving above the tree line in the distance, like a single static light watching. I can't explain why my phone lost signal, why everything went dark, or why it felt like the world itself had paused. I came home safe. Nothing physically touched me, but something about it hasn't left me. Something in the quiet weight of that night keeps me uneasy every time I drive past that stretch of road. The wind whispered through pine trees at the edge of my yard. My phone buzzed with dozens of missed calls from Tom. When I grabbed my jacket and ran outside to check, 2 men stood motionless on my porch. They didn't move when I opened the door halfway. Their faces were shadowed by black hats, and they wore matching black suits and gloves. One was tall and broad-shouldered, the other slightly shorter and thinner, but their presence felt the same, solid and unnatural. I scrambled to record them on my phone, but in that instant they vanished. No turning, no walking away. They simply weren't there anymore. I rushed outside, searching for tracks in the snow. Nothing. The snow around the porch remained perfectly smooth, as if no one had ever been there. Even the steps were undisturbed. No footprints, no melted patches from shoes. Back inside, my heart hammered. I kept checking the front window. The street remained empty, silent except for the wind rustling through distant pine trees. After an hour, I tried rationalizing the experience. Maybe a hallucination from the cold. Perhaps my brain playing tricks after the blackout. But my gut knew otherwise. That green light earlier wasn't normal. Those 2 men weren't normal. Checking the backyard revealed no new footprints from the strange flash. Only my own tracks marked the pristine snow. The pine trees stood untouched, the fence unbroken. Everything remained perfectly still. That night, sleep eluded me. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw them on the porch, motionless, staring at the door. I kept my phone on the nightstand, pointing toward the window, afraid to turn around. Morning brought another 2 inches of snow, completely covering the yard. Returning to the porch, I found nothing, not even the slightest indentation on the doormat. I told no one, not my neighbours, not Tom. Now, I always leave a light on when I go to bed. Sometimes, when I look out the window, I think I catch a shadow at the yard's edge, standing still, watching. But when I blink, it's gone. I haven't seen them again. No flashes, no black suits, no unexplained presences. But that night, the green light, the blackout, their unnatural silence, it stays with me. And I am driving back from a client meeting on Highway 62, about 30 miles outside of Ashland, Oregon. Everything felt muted under the low grey cloud cover. My dashcam was running, more out of habit than anything else, and I wasn't expecting to catch anything unusual, but then I saw it. A silver disc, hovering just above the tree line to my right, moving against the wind with an impossible smoothness. It didn't belong in the sky. I didn't scream or flinch at first. I tried to grab my phone to record, but it moved faster than I could react. The dashcam caught everything. I pulled over to the shoulder, heart racing, watching, no sound, no hum, no engine, just that surreal glide through the air. Then in an instant it darted straight up and vanished into the cloud cover. I sat frozen for 5 minutes, barely breathing. When I finally moved, I realised my phone was dead, despite being fully charged moments ago. No service. Weird. At home, I uploaded the dashcam footage, clear as day. A silver disc cutting through the grey sky, leaves shaking beneath it. That night something felt off. My backyard faces a small wooded area, but shadows seemed to move differently, peripheral movements that didn't make sense. Around 10:30 p.m, a knock at the door. Slow, deliberate, 3 times. I checked the peephole. Nothing. Cracking the door open, I saw an unmarked black car idling down the driveway. 2 men, black suits, white shirts, black ties, sunglasses, despite the dark night. One stepped out, tall, stiff. The other remained in the driver's seat. He approached, stopping 3 feet from the door. "License plate," he said. Not a question, a demand. I blinked, confused. My plate? None. I checked the dashcam footage repeatedly. It was still there. The disc, the trees swaying, everything completely untouched. Yet somehow my car no longer existed legally. No ticket, no record, nothing. When I went to the DMV to renew my registration, they couldn't find a single trace of my vehicle. Not a glitch, not a typo. My plate, my VIN completely erased. The woman behind the counter looked at me like I was losing my mind. It started with a strange encounter on the highway. A man approached my car, pulled out a notebook with surgical precision, and wrote down my plate number. When I asked who he was, he responded flatly, "Deputy Vehicular Oversight," words that sounded translated from another language. In the car nearby, another man leaned forward slightly. Both stared at me without blinking. Then they were gone. No screeching tyres, no engine noise, just vanished. I stood frozen, heart racing before finally going back inside. Later I drove to the original highway location. Nothing. No footprints, no tyre marks, no evidence anyone had been there. But strange things kept happening. Black car shapes in my rearview mirror that disappeared when I turned around. Friends just shrugged when I mentioned it. Local news laughed it off. Then one night, a black sedan parked a block away. 2 men sat motionless, staring at my house. After 20 minutes, they drove off without signals or lights. I haven't seen them since, but I'm always watching. Streetlights, neighbours' yards, my driveway, constantly scanning. My old plates sit in a drawer. Legally worthless, but I can't throw them away. The dash cam sits in my living room, playing the same footage over and over. The disc, the trees, the wind, a silent reminder of something I can't explain. The envelope arrived on a Wednesday morning, sliding under my office door before I got in. My workspace is a small downtown building with 3 rooms and a kitchen that always carries the faint scent of burned coffee. I freelance local stories for regional papers, nothing controversial that would attract strange attention. The manila envelope bore no return address, just my name written neatly in blue ink by someone who clearly took their time. Inside was a single cassette tape in a clear case, labelled in all caps with "No Play," which I initially thought was a prank from one of my courier friends. But something felt off. The adhesive label looked aged, yellowed around its edges as if it had been sitting somewhere for years. I didn't even own a cassette player anymore, so I dug up an old Sony handheld from storage. Its batteries were crusted, but I found a power cord that worked. When I hit play, about 15 seconds of static gave way to my own voice, except it wasn't a recording I recognised. The pauses, the tone, everything was familiar, yet completely foreign. I heard myself talking about 2 men in black suits who visited my office, asking about restricted materials. One had an unchanging blank expression, while the other struggled to pronounce certain words, repeating them awkwardly. The tape clicked off. I rewound and played it again. No edits, no splices, just my voice describing an encounter I had no memory of. Who would go to such trouble to create this? I hadn't done audio interviews in years. I tossed the tape back into the envelope, leaving it on my desk. Work became impossible. Every glance brought a strange pressure behind my eyes, like I was on the verge of remembering something that hadn't happened yet. By noon, the unease was overwhelming. Part of me keeps expecting these mysterious men to show up again, to seek verification, to check if I'm still paying attention. And honestly, I think they might. Jot and I headed out for a late lunch. The hallway seemed frozen when I opened the office door. 2 men stood facing each other, wearing identical black suits, white shirts and black ties. They were motionless, almost like mannequins. Simultaneously, they turned toward me. No hesitation, no difference in timing, perfectly synchronized. One attempted a smile that didn't reach his eyes. The other held a black leather folder. "Mr. Marks, we're here to retrieve the misplaced materials," the first man said. His voice deep and flat, like an old speaker playing a recording. I froze. "What materials?" I managed. The second man's response was too precise, as if reading phonetics. "The items delivered to your premises. They are not for public handling." Before I could consider lying, the smiling one tilted his head. "The cassette," he said. I noticed their black gloves, stiff and polished, not the soft winter kind. "Who are you with?" I asked. They answered in unison, "We're with the Department of Archival Security." Something about their delivery made it sound legitimate. I told them to wait while I retrieved the envelope, planning to slip out the back door and call the police from the diner across the street. But when I entered my office, they followed silently. No footsteps, just suddenly behind me. I picked up the envelope and turned around. Only one man remained. The other had vanished without a sound, the door untouched. The remaining man extended his hand. "Thank you," he said. "Who sent it to me?" I asked. A heavy silence filled the room, as if the heater had shut off. "You did," he responded. He took the envelope and walked toward the hallway. I followed a few steps behind, but when I reached the doorway, he was gone. The hall was empty. Outside, the day was quiet and overcast with light snow flurries. No cars were visible. My reflection in the glass looked pale and washed out. For the rest of the afternoon, I sat at my desk, trying to make sense of what had just happened. I tried calling Luis, the building security manager, about the cameras. He told me the footage from my hallway was corrupted, and he sounded uneasy, like this wasn't the first time something like this had happened. For days afterward, I was on high alert. I scanned reflections in store windows, watched dark sedans parked near the curb, and studied people in black coats standing by crosswalks, always searching for a hint of those same faces, but nothing came. No visits, no mail, no more envelopes. A week later, I pulled out my old voice recorder to clear some files. The moment I powered it on, it auto-played. My own voice came through, calm as before. "They will come to retrieve the misplaced materials." Then static. The file's timestamp showed it was recorded 2 days before the envelope ever appeared. I didn't play it again. Earlier, I had been replaying everything. The tape, their voices, what had been said about me sending something. I thought maybe they'd swapped the tape with a blank one, so I went through my desk drawers and found a different recorder. Just to check, I pressed play. Static crackled, but underneath, faintly, were their voices, not mine. The words were difficult to make out, but I caught fragments. Interference earlier than projected return sequence. Then the tape cut off. That night I took the recorder home. Around 11, someone knocked on my door, 3 slow knocks. When I looked through the peephole, no one was there. The next morning at the office, the cassette was gone, so was the envelope. But it wasn't just missing, the section of desk where I'd placed. It looked different, cleaner than the surrounding area. No dust, no scratch marks, as if the surface had been polished or replaced. Later that September, I went camping with my friend Laura near Fort Mountain, Georgia. It was one of those last warm weekends before the cold set in. A trip we'd been planning for months. Just 2 friends, a cooler full of beer, and no cell service for a couple of days. We drove up Friday after work, set up camp before dark, and sat around the fire drinking cheap whiskey, talking about random stuff until the stars came out. After midnight, while tossing sticks into the fire and trying to spot satellites, Laura suddenly pointed above the tree line. "That one's too low," she said. There was a light, white but not harsh, moving strangely. Son and I was at the campsite when something strange moved slowly across the sky. At first I thought it was a plane, but it wasn't blinking, and it wasn't flying normally. The object would move in a line, then stop completely and dart sideways faster than anything I'd ever seen. No sound, nothing. Just dead quiet. We both stood up. The air went really still, like even the crickets stopped. After maybe 20 seconds, the light flared green for a split second and shot straight up. Gone. We didn't sleep much after that. Laura laughed nervously, saying she didn't want to get probed. I threw a rock at her for that comment. We stayed up until the fire burned out, talking about how weird it was that the object moved like it wasn't affected by gravity. Eventually, we crashed in our tents. I thought it was just a weird but cool experience. 2 days later, I called Laura, expecting her to have looked up something online or found a local explanation. When she picked up, I asked, "You still thinking about that light?" Her response threw me completely. "What light?" she said. I laughed, thinking she was joking, but she wasn't. She told me she wasn't even camping with me that weekend. She'd been at her parents' house. She'd bailed on the trip earlier that week because of work and even sent me a photo of her and her mom at a diner from that same Friday. I checked my own photos. Every picture I thought I'd taken that night only showed one chair, one sleeping bag, one beer bottle. The chair was empty. I could hear her voice in my head from that night. Her laugh, the way she leaned back to look at the stars, the sound of her opening a beer, her phone lighting up her face when she checked the time. But she wasn't there. I sat up trying to remember if I'd seen her get out of the car when we arrived, if I'd seen her set up her tent. I couldn't. It was like every memory that proved she'd been there just slipped through my fingers. 2 mornings later, I was driving to work down Highway 76. It was mostly empty that early, and the sky was still grey with fog. About halfway there, I noticed a black car in my rear view mirror. Like a Lincoln or Chrysler. One of those big old sedans you don't see much anymore. That Tuesday morning started normal enough. I pulled into the lot behind my office, a small HVAC place on the edge of town, and noticed a car following me. Perfect distance. Not too close, not too far. When I parked, the car parked too. 2 men sat in the front seats, both wearing black suits. Strange for this muggy morning. The driver rolled down his window slowly. Before I could ask if they were lost, he spoke. "You weren't there either." His voice was flat, like stating a fact. I blinked. "What?" He didn't repeat himself. Just stared, eyes blank, face expressionless. His passenger didn't move, didn't even turn his head. They sat there a moment, then the window went up, and the car backed out smoothly like a robot was driving. I stood watching until they disappeared down the road. I didn't tell anyone at work, not even Laura, though I wanted to. The weirdest part was how ordinary it all looked. No glowing, no strange noises. Just men who seemed human, but somehow wrong in a way I couldn't explain. That night, I checked my dash cam. It always records automatically. Every day's file was there, except that morning's. Not corrupted, not blank, just missing. I started doubting myself. Maybe I dreamed part of it. Maybe I mixed up days. But if I'd been alone, whose voice was I hearing? About a week later, I drove past that same stretch of Highway 76 just before sunset. The sky was orange. Everything looked normal until I saw the black car again, parked off the shoulder, half hidden by trees. No one inside, no plates. I slowed down and pulled over about 20 yards ahead. Curiosity won. I walked back toward it. The engine was off, but I could hear something faint inside. A whisper, maybe static from a radio. The air felt charged, like standing near a live wire. Otin was driving home from Eugene with my girlfriend Megan late that Friday night. Rain had just started as we hit the stretch of Highway 58 that cuts through the Wamu National Forest. It wasn't a hard rain, just enough to blur the lines of the road and make the yellow stripes look like they were melting. We were joking about nothing, trying to ignore the fact that I'd been on the road for over 8 hours when she pointed to the sky. "What is that?" she said, voice low. I followed her finger and saw it. A cluster of lights, bright white and red, moving over the treetops. They weren't blinking like planes, not moving in formation like helicopters, just floating. Then they zipped in a line across the road, too fast to be any human-made craft I'd ever seen. Before either of us could say anything, our car shuddered and died. Just nothing. No warning lights, nothing mechanical. I tried the ignition, but it wouldn't turn over. Rain was picking up now, hammering the windshield, and I cursed under my breath. "Great," Megan muttered, her hands gripping the dashboard. "Just great." I flicked on the hazard lights and tried to call for roadside assistance. No signal, no bars, nothing. My stomach tightened. The forest was dark except for the rain glinting off the asphalt, and that feeling crawled up my spine. The one where you know you're not alone, even when you can't see anyone. Later I peered through the driver's window of a car I found. The interior was spotless, too clean, and there was a folder on the passenger seat labelled Friday. I didn't open it. I just backed away, got in my truck and left. The next morning the car was gone. No tyre tracks on the shoulder, no sign anyone had ever been there. I've tried to find that campsite again since, but the dirt road that led there doesn't look the same. I drove around for hours one weekend and couldn't find the same clearing, couldn't even find the tree with the bent trunk where we'd tied the tarp. Laura stopped answering my texts after I asked about it again, and said I was creeping her out. Sometimes when I'm driving alone at night, I think about that green flash and the way her laugh sounded across the fire. And sometimes in my mirror I catch a glimpse of dark glass headlights that keep perfect distance behind me after miles, until I pull over. Then they vanish, like they were never here. I don't tell anyone about it anymore. There's nothing to prove, nothing to show, just a few missing minutes, a friend who says she wasn't here, and a voice that told me I wasn't either. There we were, driving along a lonely road in the rain when I spotted them. 2 men walking slowly on the shoulder, dressed identically. Black suits, white shirts, black ties. Their hair was perfectly combed, shoes spotless despite the muddy ground. Something was off about their eyes. They didn't reflect the headlights at all, as if they absorbed light completely. I rolled down the window slightly and called out, "Can we help you?" They stopped just feet from the car, standing absolutely still. One spoke without changing expression, his voice flat and emotionless. "Do you require correction assistance?" Megan gripped my arm, her eyes wide with fear. "Excuse me?" I stammered. The man repeated correction assistance with the same robotic precision. The other remained motionless, staring blankly. I tried to lighten the tension with a nervous laugh. "Like roadside help? A tow?" His response sounded less like agreement and more like a programmed affirmation from some manual. "Verification required." I started to open the car door, but Megan pulled me back. Rain soaked through my jacket instantly, yet these men remained completely dry. Not a single drop on their clothing. I noticed small silver instruments in their hands, almost surgical in appearance, and my stomach churned. "We can call someone," I said, fumbling for my phone. No signal. They didn't react, didn't move, just waited. Then, with uncanny synchronization, both men leaned forward slightly, studying the car. Their movement felt rehearsed, as if they'd practiced this encounter countless times. "You will comply," one said, the words seeming to pass through him rather than originate from him. "Observation cannot persist beyond tolerances," Megan whispered. "What the hell are they talking about?" No response came. As abruptly as they appeared, they turned and walked toward the tree line, deliberately, slowly. Then, in an instant, they vanished. Not by running or hiding, but simply gone. One moment present at the road's edge, the next, nothing. No footprints, no mud stains, no disturbance in the grass. And I've been driving that stretch of highway for years, but nothing prepared me for what happened that night. With Megan beside me, everything felt normal until suddenly it wasn't. The car went dead, impossibly heavy, like we'd sunk into the road itself. When I tried the ignition, it turned over immediately, lights flickering back on, the radio's static hum returning. My stomach was so knotted I thought I might be sick. We drove in silence, staring at the tree line, half expecting to see them again. But there was nothing. No car, no footprints, just rain falling and the highway stretching endlessly ahead. The next day, I went back with work boots and a flashlight, thinking maybe the rain had washed away evidence. Mud, leaves, tyre tracks. Nothing. Not even a mark where they'd been standing. It was like the world had rewritten itself overnight. I tried telling people, friends, co-workers. Most laughed. Some thought I was joking. I started by mentioning the black suits, which made them roll their eyes harder. When I brought up the strange lights, they either didn't believe me or dismissed it as a plane, reflection or satellite. Weeks have passed. The car works fine now, but every time I drive that stretch I check the tree line, slow down at the curve and grip the wheel a little tighter. I've tried rationalising it. Maybe an elaborate prank, maybe hallucinations from sleep deprivation. But Megan saw it too, and she's not one to exaggerate. I haven't seen them again. Not on the road, not in parking lots, not at home. Yet every time a black car slows behind me, or I catch a shadow from the corner of my eye, that same knot returns to my stomach. It feels like they're still watching, waiting. And honestly, I don't think I'd refuse their correction if they came back. It all started on a sunny Thursday in Portland's Pioneer Square. I was playing my usual set near the fountain, surrounded by tourists and office workers. My guitar, a small amp, and a cardboard sign for tips were my companions. Things were typical. Coins dropping, someone laughing at my off-key cover. Then, while strumming, I looked up and saw it. A silver disc-shaped object hovering about 100 feet above the fountain. It wasn't moving like a helicopter or drone. No wobbling, no sound. It just hung there, reflecting sunlight with a sharp, weird glint. I froze mid-strum. The fountain burbled. A pigeon flew past. And on I was playing my guitar when something bizarre unfolded. Suddenly, everything around me froze. Not. Just paused, but completely suspended in time. The people in the plaza were trapped in mid-motion. A woman with a stroller hung mid-step. A suited man's coffee cup hovered halfway to his mouth. A kid leaning over a fountain had his hand suspended above the water. Even my own fingers were barely moving on the guitar strings. That's when I noticed them. 2 men in black standing just off to my left, perfectly still yet somehow different from the frozen scene. Unlike everyone else, they were subtly moving, watching me with an intense, deliberate focus. In a blink, the world snapped back to normal. People started moving, talking, dropping coins as if nothing had happened. The mysterious moment vanished. I pulled out my phone, which I'd been using to livestream on Instagram. Rewinding the footage confirmed what I'd experienced. For exactly 10 seconds, everyone in the plaza was completely motionless, except for those 2 men. They moved slowly, deliberately, turning and watching me with unreadable expressions. They wore classic black suits, black ties, clean shoes, nothing particularly remarkable except their impossible movement during the freeze. Their faces looked like movie extras, impassive, controlled. That night at home, I reviewed the footage again. The scene repeated exactly, a perfect 10-second pause with everyone suspended, except these 2 men. One had dark, combed-back hair and a sharp jawline. The other tilted his head slightly as if assessing me. Sometimes their lips seemed to move, but no words matched their motions. I tried telling a friend who loves urban legends but couldn't provide more details. They didn't blend with the crowd, yet somehow didn't stand out either. When I returned to the plaza the next day, the spot where they had stood was completely empty. I can't remember exactly when it started, but I know I was about 9 years old that Sunday night. I was in the kitchen, just rinsing a glass, when the windows began to buzz. It wasn't a loud sound, more like a low, subtle vibration that seemed to make the air itself feel strange. Something happened in Pioneer Square that day, something I can't fully explain. Regular people were moving normally, pigeons were gathered, fountains were splashing, and then suddenly, everything stopped. For days afterward, I kept seeing flashes of that moment in my mind whenever I walked through crowded areas. 2 men in black suits seemed to be watching, their lips moving slightly out of sync. I caught glimpses of them everywhere, once in a grocery store near the cereal aisle, but when I looked again, they were gone. A week later, I checked the footage again. The 10-second segment was still there, but something was different. In one frame, it looked like they were looking directly at me through the screen, and the tilt of their heads matched what I remembered from that day. My stomach turned, and I closed the laptop. I didn't play in Pioneer Square for 2 weeks. When I finally went back, everything seemed normal, just tourists, office workers, pigeons, and the fountain. But every time I set up near that spot, I felt like someone could just decide to unfreeze the world at any moment, and I'd be the only one moving, the only one noticing. I haven't told anyone about the footage. People would laugh, right? But I can't bring myself to delete it. I keep it on a hidden backup drive, and sometimes late at night, I play that 10-second clip over and over, watching the crowd freeze, watching the 2 men move, watching them silently examining me. I know whatever happened wasn't a prank or a camera glitch. It was something else. Something I don't understand. Something that doesn't belong in this world. The worst part is I don't know why it noticed me or why it's still watching. Since then, I've avoided Pioneer Square during peak hours. I take side streets, quieter corners, and I never leave my phone out in the open when I play. But sometimes, in a reflection, a window or a darkened screen, I think I see them again. 2 black suits moving against the frozen chaos of the world, just waiting for the moment I noticed them. I don't know what they wanted. I don't know why me. I don't know if I'm supposed to do something, but I do know this. I keep playing my music. I keep recording. I keep watching the edges of my world because they're probably still here somewhere, studying. The water conditioner seemed fine when I first checked it. This wasn't a mechanical issue. The sound was different now, deeper and steadier, almost as if it originated from the air itself. After turning off the faucet, I stood listening. The noise didn't fade. Instead, it pulsed slowly and heavily, resonating more in my chest than in my ears. Barefoot, I stepped onto the back porch and looked up. The sky was clear and still, with no wind or stars, just a dull orange haze from streetlights. The hum grew stronger when I opened the door. It seemed to come from above the house. Initially, I thought it might be a helicopter flying low, but there were no lights, no movement, no rotor sounds. Just a smooth, perfect tone hanging in the air. Walking into the yard with my phone ready, the sound shifted slightly lower when I pointed the camera upward, almost as if reacting to me. Then I saw it. A dark shape directly above the roof. Not quite circular or triangular, but more like a smooth, flat disc with soft edges. The surface absorbed light completely, even with the porch light on. I started recording, but the screen showed only darkness with a faint blur. Zooming in, the hum suddenly stopped. The silence that followed was thick and oppressive. No crickets, no cars, nothing. In that moment, it disappeared. Not by speeding away, but simply vanishing between 1 second and the next. As I stood there trying to process what I'd seen, footsteps approached. Turning toward the front of the house, I expected a neighbour. Instead, 2 men were walking up my driveway. They looked distinctly out of place. Both wore impeccably tailored black suits. Not office attire, but the kind you only see on television. Black shoes, black ties, white shirts, no jackets or hats. Their clothes looked fresh, as if just unwrapped. One was taller, with slicked back hair that didn't move. The shorter had unnaturally pale skin and an oddly smooth face, seemingly without pores. "Evening," the tall one said in a calm, neutral voice. "Did you happen to hear anything unusual just now?" I froze midway between the yard and porch steps. My phone still in hand, screen dark. The government agents approached me with an unsettling precision. Their movements were synchronized, their questions carefully measured. "I don't know," I mumbled, suggesting maybe a plane had caused the noise. They claimed to be from a federal response unit, specifically the Noise Abatement Division. Something about their demeanour felt off. The taller one spoke with a practiced smile that didn't quite reach his eyes, while the shorter agent scanned the yard methodically, his gaze sweeping from side to side without moving his head. "Did you record anything?" the tall agent asked. I lied and said no. Behind them, a black sedan sat silently at the end of my driveway. No headlights, no engine sound, no visible license plates. It was like a scene from an old government conspiracy film. Their interaction was clinical. "Everything seems normal now," the shorter agent declared. As they prepared to leave, the tall one stopped midway down the driveway. "You should delete any videos you took tonight," he warned quietly. "Sometimes these things carry interference." The car departed in an impossible silence, rolling backward without a sound. When they were gone, my heart racing, I checked my phone. The video showed the night sky, blurry and dark with a faint background hum. At the footage's end, 2 shadowy figures appeared at the frame's edge, walking toward the house. The timestamp read 9:08 p.m, but my stove clock showed 9:43. Something wasn't right, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd just experienced something well beyond ordinary. I didn't sleep much last night. Low hums seemed to vibrate through the walls, and every time I looked out the window, a black car appeared to idle by the curb. When morning came, I checked the driveway for tyre marks or footprints. Nothing was there. Later that afternoon, the video vanished from my phone. Not corrupted or deleted, just completely gone from the gallery and cloud backup. By evening, a black envelope sat on my porch. No postage, no writing, just sealed shut. Inside was a single blank sheet of paper. I stopped trying to understand. My sister thought it sounded like a dream, and my co-worker suggested it was probably a drone. Yet late at night, the air would still buzz low and deep. I'd find myself standing at the window, waiting for it to stop, and it always did, leaving the neighbourhood eerily silent, as if everything was holding its breath. I haven't gone outside during these moments since that night, because the last thing I saw before it vanished wasn't an aircraft. It was my own reflection in the kitchen window. 2 men stood perfectly still at the end of the driveway, watching the house in the dark. I was driving home from the deli shift. Upstate New York's soft roads were heavy with wet snow, the storm continuing for hours past midnight. Route 9A's sodium lights turned falling flakes into a steady, slow glare. About 20 minutes into my drive, headlights appeared behind me. There's always traffic this time of night. Ploughs, big rigs. But these lights didn't pass or flash impatiently. They suddenly appeared in my mirror and settled behind me, as if they'd been waiting. The black sedan's windows were too dark to see inside. No matter how I changed speed, it maintained a consistent distance, 4 car lengths back whether I drove 40 or 30. I didn't attempt to pass. Initially I thought the driver might be tired or lost. The snow muffled everything. Road noise, my tyres, occasional branch cracks. The sedan's headlights remained hard and white in my mirror, 2 coins unscattered by falling snow. A small nagging feeling crept up on me as I drove through the night. The black sedan was trailing me, its movements unnervingly precise. I noticed something odd about the driver. No shifting, no turning, just a constant unblinking stare. I pulled into the 24-hour Exxon near the junction, hoping to make sense of the situation. The lot was mostly empty, with tyre tracks cutting through the snow and a broken cigarette butt lying nearby. The black sedan slowed behind me, staying on the shoulder, its headlights piercing through the falling flakes. For 15 minutes, I waited. I nosed into a pump and killed the engine to warm up. The sedan remained where it had stopped. No movement, no sign of life. Its lights stayed steady. Unnerved, I tried calling my sister Heather, wanting someone else to know what was happening. My phone showed 1 bar before glitching and dropping the call. I attempted to call the police non-emergency number, but the line went dead after a generic transfer message. By the time I found my charger and cranked up the heat, the sedan had vanished into the white landscape. I realised I'd been holding my breath, and now the sounds in the car felt overwhelmingly loud. Heater fans, melting snow dripping from mirrors. Keeping the radio low, I eased back onto the highway. The sedan reappeared, maintaining the same distance and angle in my mirror. I tried to throw it off by exiting onto Wyndham Road, taking the back route behind the old mill. The streetlights gave way to the darker glow near the river. The sedan followed, and when a county plough rounded the bend, it nudged forward to the next lane, keeping that precise gap. No signals, no attempts to pass, and that's when real worry set in. Not because of the car's presence, but because of the driver's complete lack of movement. I kept looking for ordinary signs, steering corrections, a tired head tilt, but the silhouette remained as still as a photograph. My hands gripped the wheel, white-knuckled, with that cold, sour feeling you get before running a red light. Near my house, a stretch of road with 3 closely clustered driveways approached. Then I'd been driving cautiously, determined to lose whoever was following me. Darting into the first available driveway, I paused briefly before pulling out again. I wove through every side street and back road I knew, performing that nervous dance people do when trying to shake an unwanted tail. The sedan matched my every move with unsettling precision. Slow down, and it slowed. Turn left, and it turned left. No tyre squeals, no sudden headlight flashes, just an eerie, calm pursuit that settled like a weight in my chest. When I finally reached Maple Street, with its towering elms and single street lamp near the postbox, the black sedan remained behind me. I could see my driveway ahead, the path I'd cleared earlier, the small mound of salt on the curb. As I pulled in and idled, feeling slightly ridiculous, the sedan slowed at the road's end and then vanished. One moment, 2 hard lights in my mirror. The next, nothing but an untouched stretch of snow. No tyre tracks, no engine noise, no skid marks. Simply gone. I cut the engine, listening to the heater fan wind down, my breath fogging the cabin. Even the radio seemed muted in the sudden silence. Walking to the mailbox before heading to the porch, I noticed something odd. The snow around the drive looked undisturbed, only my shovel marks and faint tyre compressions visible. No tracks from where the sedan had been, no evidence of its presence anywhere. Inside, the house settled with familiar sounds, the refrigerator humming, old pipes creaking. I made tea and tried convincing myself I was just tired, that the storm had made everything seem strange. The sedan driver probably turned onto a side road, I told myself, and I just hadn't seen the dust cloud. Sleep didn't come easily. I kept waking, thinking I heard the faint tick of car lights turning down the street, sliding like a second hand across a clock face. At 4 a.m, I pulled back the curtains. The street was empty. Driving home late, the postbox cast a pale pool through drifting snowflakes. No cars parked, no movement at the corner. I started avoiding that stretch at night after that. For my next deli shift, I took a longer route home. The 10-minute loop let me pass more intersections and see more people. Heather said it sounded like something from a late-night TV show about creeps in rentals. She told me to call the cops if anything happened again. I wanted to believe that would be enough. 2 nights later, the same feeling returned. An emptiness filled my rearview mirror, suddenly interrupted by a pair of lights. This time, my dashcam was running, a habit I'd developed for potential insurance claims or bad driver encounters. The lights settled behind me and the camera recorded everything. The footage showed steady taillights, falling snow, and 2 bright beams reflecting. When I rewound the recording the next morning, the headlights were exactly where I remembered. Through the low-resolution tint, the camera caught a glimpse of the driver, a shape with no moving features, no blinking, nothing. I watched the dark patch in the front seat like someone mesmerised by a slot machine, waiting for a change that never came. At the sheriff's station, I showed the footage during a free moment. He watched silently, his mouth opening and closing without sound. "We could file a report," he said. When he asked if anything else had happened, I mentioned phone issues, calls dropping in dead spots on Route 9A where cell signals vanish. He didn't write that down, looking uneasy in the way professionals do when something feels more unsettling than illegal. "Keep your lights on," he advised. "Come straight here if it happens again." Mrs. Kowalski brought soup a few mornings later after hearing about the streetlight incident. "Lived on Maple for 30 years and knows how to see what people want hidden," she said, her hands folded in her apron. "You didn't see anyone get out, right?" "No," I told her. Nothing had moved. She said, "Keep the porch light on." Her words hung softly in the air. "You'll feel better." The world beyond my window became a canvas of shadows and uncertain movement. Nights stretched long, and I found myself hyper-aware of every peripheral flicker. When I'd pull into the driveway late, street lamps would smear snowflakes across my vision, and I'd glance repeatedly in the rearview mirror before killing the engine. It started on a Thursday night, unusually clear for Colorado, with that brittle late winter dryness that makes sounds crisp and edges sharp. I was on the porch, DSLR in hand, capturing the sky. Something moved between houses and trees, slow, almost deliberate. Not a plane, satellite, or helicopter. I managed several decent shots before it simply blinked out, vanishing into darkness. My co-workers call me paranoid. They say overtime and cold conspire to transform ordinary things into stories. Maybe they're right. Maybe I'm just jumpy. But something wasn't normal. At 3 a.m, while making a sandwich, headlights appeared in the window across the street. Not on the corner, not in the mirror. Just suddenly there, then gone when I blinked. My hands kept working, but my eyes remained fixed on the glass. The dashcam file revealed something unsettling. A silhouette existing simultaneously inside and outside reality. Phone calls dropped mysteriously during these moments. The sheriff's response was maddeningly casual. Strangeness travels. He shrugged and walked away. No tracks marked the snow where the car had waited that first night. Days passed. The space where those unexplained lights once filled my mirror became empty again. Yet with each late shift, each blank sky, I find myself bracing, checking mirrors, waiting for the world behind me to suddenly materialize. Lights, a still driver, no explanation. I lock my door. I check the mailbox in daylight. I shovel the same bit of sidewalk. Snow keeps falling. Life continues. Tiny chores, errands, coffee at the deli. But something lingers, just beyond perception. I live on a quiet cul-de-sac where seeing a car is an unusual occurrence. This particular vehicle was sleek and black, parked with almost surgical precision across from my driveway. Its alignment seemed deliberate, almost choreographed. From my window I noticed 2 men sitting motionless inside. They wore dark suits and remained perfectly still, facing straight ahead. Their sudden appearance was jarring. One moment the street was empty, the next this car materialized as if by magic. I stepped outside, phone discreetly in hand, trying to appear casual. February's cold wind rattled bare tree branches around me. The men didn't react to my presence. Their posture was unnervingly rigid, like department store mannequins frozen in place. I waved, half in greeting, half in disbelief. No response. They didn't move, didn't acknowledge me. Their faces were hidden in shadow, creating an unsettling tableau that felt more like a staged scene than a random encounter. Eventually I went inside and locked the door. While making tea at the kitchen table, I kept watching the street. Nothing stirred. No footsteps, no car sounds, just occasional wind whispers. The next morning, something was off. My camera and phone showed no record of the previous night. The memory cards were completely blank, as if the entire incident had been erased. No photos, no evidence, nothing. Walking outside to investigate, I found no trace of the car, no tyre marks, no footprints in the dust. The street looked perfectly normal, which somehow felt more disturbing. I called a neighbour to confirm my experience. They hadn't seen anything unusual. Being the sole witness in a neighbourhood of 50 houses made the experience even more unsettling. By mid-morning, I was questioning my own perception. Was it a hallucination, or something else entirely? I noticed something odd happening on my street. At first, nothing seemed unusual, but then my neighbour's dog started barking. When I looked down the street, I saw a man walking slowly toward the end of the cul-de-sac. His appearance was striking. A black suit, hands at his sides, with a calm and deliberate movement. No hat, no bag. Nothing about him suggested why he was there. Instinctively, I ducked behind the blinds. He walked steadily, keeping his head straight, never looking around. Then he passed the end of the street and disappeared into a side road without glancing back. Over the next few days, I kept checking the street. Late at night, I thought I'd see a shape in a dark sedan parked 2 or 3 houses away. But when I got close, nothing was there. The whole block looked completely normal, with only the memory of that first car across the street as a hint of something strange. 2 days later, while walking the dog, I spotted a black sedan parked at the edge of the cul-de-sac. I stopped, pretending to tie my shoe. It was the same car, with the same dark, shiny exterior and impossible neatness. The driver didn't blink as I glanced up. For a moment, I swear his eyes were fixed straight at me, though that seemed impossible when he didn't react to my attempted wave. He just sat there, still as a dark sculpture. I kept walking, trying to act normal, but I felt watched. Every turn seemed mirrored by distant headlight glints. The air felt heavier, tighter. Once home, I locked the doors and checked all the windows. Nothing moved. The street was empty, yet the memory of those men in black, perfectly aligned with the curb, wouldn't leave me. Weeks later, I tried downloading software to recover lost photos. Nothing. It was as if my phone had never recorded that night. When I tried telling friends about the light in the sky, the car, the 2 men in black, it sounded insane. They suggested weather balloons, satellites, drones, but none of that explained the strange silence, how those men seemed to exist outside time, or the total erasure of images from my devices. I never saw the car again after that week. Not the same one, not anywhere nearby, but sometimes, when I'm up late with the porch light on and the street quiet, I think I see a dark shape at the corner of my vision, a silhouette too still, too clean. I realise I'm holding my breath without knowing it. My camera sits on the shelf, memory card in, but I don't touch it when I see that shape. It's as if the memory itself is fragile, and whatever was out there that night might return if I try to capture it again. They arrived that first night while I was alone at the cabin. I'd driven down the coast to get away from the city, spending a week with a sketchbook and a cheap space heater, nothing fancy. By the third night, I was halfway through a thermos of coffee, thinking the whole thing had been a good idea. The cliff above the little beach sat maybe 100 yards from the door, a carved-out notch of dark rock and dune grass that dropped straight into a slice of sand. I'd been watching the tide come and go all afternoon. When the light died, the place went to that hollow, winded kind of quiet you only get when there's no one else for miles. I was getting the wood stove going when I saw them. 2 figures on the bluff, standing perfectly still and looking out at the ocean. At first, I thought they were watching the water like any other people. Then I realised they weren't bundled up. Not that kind of bundled up. They were in suits, dark suits, white shirts. Nothing like the fleece and parkas I'd packed. Their shoes caught the last light and didn't have any grit on them. Whoever they were, they might as well have been made out of a different weather. I stepped closer to the sliding glass and went out to the porch, with the mug still warm in my hands, letting the wind take the steam away. The air smelled like salt and old kelp. I called up to them more out of politeness than anything. "Hey, evening folks, you get up here?" "Okay." The words left my mouth wet and small in the wind. They didn't move, not even a blink. One of them leaned. I thought he might turn to look. He didn't. They were both facing the water, shoulders squared as if fixed to watch a long, slow movie. The taller one's hair was close cut and neat, in a way that said he didn't do manual work. The shorter one had a face that looked too clean to be my imagination. Nothing in it to tell age or habit. When I waved my arm, both of them turned their heads at the exact same degree and the exact same speed. It was small and mechanic, like two puppet heads rotating on the same axle. The shorter one cocked his head almost as if trying to hear something across the wind, and then, still not looking at me, the taller one called down in a plain voice, "Do you require assistance?" The word came down like a question, but not exactly. It sounded rehearsed, like a phrase someone had practiced once and kept in a pocket. I told them, "No, I was fine, thanks." And for the next 10 minutes, I hovered on the porch while the wind made the house creak and the gulls argued over a crab. They never moved. Here's the rewritten text. Something wasn't right on the beach that morning. The night before, I'd noticed two men whose movements seemed eerily synchronized. They'd adjust their jackets with identical gestures, like reflections of each other that didn't quite match my own movements. Then the fog rolled in, thick and sudden, draping itself over the bluff like a heavy blanket. The men disappeared into the mist, their silhouettes swallowed completely. Back inside, I tried to rationalize what I'd seen. Maybe they were private investigators, or part of a film crew. Perhaps they were waiting for a tow truck with a broken-down vehicle. But nothing explained their perfectly polished shoes, or the unsettling stillness that surrounded them. Sleep came in fragmented intervals, an hour awake, an hour dozing. Before dawn, I stepped outside to check the beach. The sky was uncertain, wavering between rain and clearing. What caught my eye first was the sand. A single, impossibly straight line stretched from the bluff to the cabin door. This wasn't a trail of footprints or a scuffed path. It looked compressed, as if a steamroller had pressed a perfect narrow band into the ground. Closer inspection revealed something bizarre. The band was packed firm but showed no traces of movement, no toe marks, no heel impressions, no disturbance in the sand's texture. If someone had walked this line, there should have been edges, ridges, drag marks. Instead, there was nothing. The surrounding sand bore only wind patterns and gull tracks. This line was pristine and unnatural. It ran precisely from the cliff's edge to the bottom porch step, ending as if someone had taken one careful step and then vanished. I checked the bluff. The grass at the edge remained undisturbed. Gull droppings and rain streaks marked the cliff face as always. No prints in the sand above either. Normally someone descending would leave a ragged path or footprint trail, but not this time. The band seemed to emerge from the sand itself like a line drawn by an invisible hand. My first impulse was to call the ranger and report something that would sound completely ridiculous. A trespasser at 3 a.m, yet I hesitated, not wanting to create unnecessary drama. I went down to the beach after taking photos from the porch, determined to understand the mysterious band of compacted sand. My phone images showed a straight line cutting across the landscape, no discoloration or footprints visible. After a cold breakfast, I walked into town. Main Street felt ordinary. People grabbing coffee, the post office displaying a summer concert flyer. I mentioned the strange occurrence to Jan at the hardware store, who merely shrugged and asked about raccoons. Her casual response made me feel small. I could have told her about two men in suits on the bluff, but knew she'd just talk about roofing crews. By afternoon, the wind had shifted, softly blowing the sand. I returned to the beach. The band remained like a scar across the grain. Kneeling, I ran my finger along its edge. It was so compacted that my fingernail left only a light mark. I dug a little, searching for anything underneath. Trash, foil, a hidden footprint. Nothing. The rest of the beach looked normal, with typical wind lines and scattered shells. This band was different. That evening restlessness drove me to the bluff. I moved carefully where rocks dropped off. The grass showed no disturbance, no boot impressions, no cigarette butts, no bottle caps. A gull screeched and skittered past. I stood watching, hoping to see two figures walking along the ridge, but the horizon remained quiet and grey. On my way back, I noticed two scuffed grass blades at the bluff's top, as if someone had briefly placed a foot there. Close up, they seemed insignificant, possibly made by a deer or a child's boot. I couldn't be certain. The last strange thing that week happened on Thursday. I was packing the car to return to the city, deciding to cut the trip short. Sleeping alone felt different after the sand incident, and work was piling up. As I prepared to leave, I noticed a small brass key, and an cabin gate was on the kitchen table. The key was just sitting there, clean as the rest of the place. I knew I hadn't touched it because I always leave it here when I go out. I don't have an explanation for that. I did what seemed sensible. I took a photo of the band on the beach. I put the key in my pocket. At the ranger station, when the fog lifted, I told them what I'd found. The ranger listened, then wrote me a note saying they'd send someone to check on routine. The phrase sounded like something from a bureaucrat who'd seen 100 similar strange nights and filed them away. He asked one simple practical question I hadn't thought about. "Did you lock the cabin when you left last night?" I said, "Yes, of course I had." He nodded like that proved something. On the drive north, the fog peeled away as though someone had pulled a curtain back. The radio popped with local weather. The sun was a low coin in the sky, and the little town shrank behind me. I kept glancing at the key in my pocket like it might whisper something. I drove with the windows cracked, the wind picking salt on my face. At a stoplight, a teenager with a dog on the hood yelled something about the score, and I felt the world reasserting itself in the simplest ways. I told a couple of friends when I got home, late and half asleep. They made the polite, interesting noises. One asked if I'd seen men in suits before, a joke, because you hear that sort of phrase in whispered stories. I said, no, I hadn't. I don't know what they were. The word that kept popping into my head was watching, but I don't mean watched like someone looking at a house to take something. I mean watched like someone examining the sea. Maybe that's what they were doing. Maybe they weren't human quite the way human is when you meet them in a grocery store. Maybe I only imagined the line of sand. Maybe the sand compressed because of tide patterns I didn't understand. I go back sometimes, not often. The band in the sand will show up in my head like a page I can't stop turning. The cliff is a place you can stand and feel small and very much in the middle of the world. And what I'll remember is the way two figures looked almost like they belonged on a postcard, and almost like they didn't belong anywhere at all. I always check the sand now before I walk barefoot down the steps. I lock the door twice. I leave the light on when I leave. Chat and I run North Trail a lot. It's a 15-mile round trip with steady climbing that always clears my head. This particular morning in late September was crisp and quiet. The trees caught between summer green and autumn's bent branches. I left before sunrise, wanting solitude. The trail was empty, my shoes crunching on frost-hardened dirt. In the distance, a creek murmured and a marmot occasionally rattled. Those early hours are special, when the world hasn't fully awakened and you're focused only on the work in your muscles. Small details started feeling strange. First, the birds went quiet. One moment, the slopes were full of morning chatter and wing flutters. Then, for about 100 yards, complete silence. No blackbirds, no jays, not even tiny insect chirps. The quiet was so thick I heard my own breathing more prominently. My music player began acting odd. It started skipping in a way that wasn't a normal. Audio hiccup, but like it was stuck on static between tracks. When I checked, the screen froze momentarily before returning to the home menu. I dismissed it as a battery issue. The sky remained that clean, hard blue you get after a dry front. Rain clouds I'd seen earlier drifted across the western horizon. A misty line rolled through the pines and the temperature dropped a few degrees. I zipped up my jacket and continued. A faint, unfamiliar scent came and went with the wind. Metallic, like standing near a welder, but cleaner and lighter. At the horseshoe turn where hikers usually gather, nothing. I waved at 3 empty spots where I could have sworn jackets or packs would normally be. Sometimes life presents little puzzles we learn to live with, some of which never get solved. And at first, I didn't notice anything unusual. My GPS was blinking, my heartbeat steady, and I was moving along the trail as usual. The late September sky had a hard light that made me feel oddly exposed, like a slice of the world had been cut away. Fresh boot prints caught my attention. Large treads like work boots marked the path, and I followed them for about 20 paces, thinking I might catch up to someone. The trail led to a flat rock and then simply stopped. No path forward, no signs leading into the brush. I took a sip of water and tried to make sense of the sudden stillness. Sometimes the trail feels empty, sometimes full. I'd probably just missed some hikers who went through earlier. Then I rounded a bend and saw two men standing completely motionless in the middle of the path, shoulder to shoulder. Their appearance was strange: black jackets with suit-like collars, dark slacks, and immaculate shoes with no scuff marks. Not the typical hiker gear of fleece and bright colours. No backpacks, nothing. The taller one had a short military-style haircut. The other had a lined face with a neutral expression that revealed nothing. They weren't looking at each other or the trees. Both faced down the path directly toward me. I slowed down, as I always do when passing others on a single-track trail. I tried to step aside, but they didn't move. Not an inch, not a blink. They stood like store mannequins, balanced, composed, slightly stiff. I said, "Morning," the standard trail greeting. No response. I said it again, louder, then realised how absurd it was to talk to strangers who seemed to be ignoring me. I stepped off the trail onto a narrow shoulder and walked by at a clipped jog. As I passed, the taller man's gaze fixed on me with a flatness that made the hair on my forearm stand up. He didn't blink or turn his head. I felt like I was slipping through someone's photograph. Halfway past them, a weird thought struck me. Their lips seemed to move slightly, out of sync with sounds in the air. Not words exactly, just a micro-motion of mouths like something in the wind. Maybe it was just my imagination. And I was running hard up the mountain trail, pushing myself on a clear morning. The valley sprawled open in the distance, mountain peaks crusted with late-season snow. My GPS watch showed 10:12, matching my phone's time. Nothing seemed unusual. About 20 minutes later, I stopped at a small rocky outcropping to rest and drink water. I set my pack down and checked my watch to log my split. Suddenly the screen blinked 9:10, an entire hour behind. My stomach clenched like I'd forgotten something important. I laughed out loud, startled, and tapped the watch face. The numbers immediately jumped back to 10:13 as if nothing had happened. This made no sense. My watch was only 8 months old, well maintained, and typically synced perfectly with satellite time. I dropped it in streams, banged it on rocks, and it had always been reliable. I tried to reconstruct the missing time. Had I sat down at a shaded switchback? Did I accidentally nap? I couldn't account for the hour. Strange details started emerging as I headed back down the trail. My phone's battery dropped from 72% to 50% in just 30 minutes, though I hadn't used it. The stream water tasted oddly acidic on the first sip, then normal on the second. 2 hikers passed me, giving me an uncomfortably long, assessing look. Something felt off, but I couldn't pinpoint exactly what. The mountain seemed to hold secrets that day, playing tricks on my perception of time and reality. My eyes drifted across the trail section where I'd earlier walked, then quickly looked away. 2 men had been standing there during my run, and I told a woman in a blue windbreaker about them while we sat on a bench near the trailhead, tying our shoes. She listened carefully, her face patient. "Weird calls have been coming into the park this week," she said. "People reporting strange lights and phone service drops. I thought it was just old-timers exaggerating." We laughed together, swapping trail stories. But something felt different about this conversation. The usual friendly warmth didn't settle quite right. Back in the parking lot, everything seemed normal. My car waited exactly where I'd left it, and day hikers were filing out from the high meadows. I stuffed my shoes into the open tailgate, yet I felt like I'd slipped through some invisible seam in the world. Driving home, traffic moved anonymously. The radio jumped between songs and weather reports. I kept unconsciously checking my watch, which showed the correct time. The phone worked normally. A few days later, I returned with a friend in daylight. Not to prove anything, but to understand the fragmented memory of that morning. We walked the same stretch where I'd seen the 2 men. Ordinary things surrounded us: lichen-covered rocks, a cracked trail marker, a picnic table with carved initials. No footprints marked the underbrush where those men might have stood. We did find the mysterious boot prints on the flat rock again, dark impressions pressed into the dirt for no apparent reason. When my friend crossed, near them, he simply shrugged and said, "Odd," then continued walking. At the ranger station, I asked about recent reports. He described a strange week: a couple whose watch had stopped, a woman followed by a car with 2 men, a hunter talking about lights. He didn't connect these incidents, maintaining his professional balance of caution and diplomacy. He tapped a filing cabinet, made a note in a small book, and handed me a trail etiquette flyer. I'm not a believer in extraordinary explanations. I'm a runner who loves getting lost in the rhythmic work of legs and lungs. But I can't shake the texture of that morning. The paused birds, the metallic wind smell, those two men standing like silent props, the watch that betrayed me for an hour. Whatever happened on that trail was small in the world's grand record. No headlines, no missing persons, just an unexplained moment hanging in memory. One NA run that once held a small private moment now feels different. Sometimes when I pass that horseshoe urn, the world narrows. I catch myself checking my shoulders, breathing deliberately as if that might steady something invisible. The watch works fine these days, but I still look at it more than before, counting minutes like someone who learned an unexpected lesson mid-run. You can be certain of your location and still lose an hour without explanation. It was early June, driving back to Austin from my cousin's place near Fort Stockton. The highway between El Dorado and Menard stretches quiet. Flat land, ranch fences, occasional windmills. About 3 hours into the drive, half listening to a podcast, I noticed something odd. A cattle herd stood bunched near the fence line, all facing the same direction, not grazing. Slowing to 50, I scanned where they were looking. A bright orange light hung low over the hills, not moving, not blinking like a plane. It dimmed suddenly, as if someone turned down a knob, then vanished completely. Out here, weird sights aren't unusual. Pipeline flares, towers, strange reflections. You see things. Passing the herd, 2 black pickup trucks caught my eye. Parked 100 yards down the fence line, angled toward the road, windows completely tinted. When I passed, I checked the rearview mirror. For a long moment, nothing moved. Then both trucks' headlights flipped on simultaneously. I told myself to relax. I wasn't doing anything wrong, but the timing felt too precise. Watching my mirrors, I noticed they pulled onto the road behind me. Not fast, just steady. The kind of driving that suggests you want to stay exactly where you are. Probably just ranchers or oil workers heading the same direction, I thought. But they maintained exactly the same distance behind me. If I slowed, they slowed. A choreographed pursuit that felt anything but random. Guns when I was driving, and they were right behind me. 2 trucks matching my every move. When I'd slow down 5 miles an hour, they'd slow down too. I'd speed up a little, and they'd match my pace exactly. No variation. Miles passed with just the 3 of us on the road. The sun was dropping low, casting that hot orange haze across the horizon. Near Menard, the road curves slightly, and I turned left onto a smaller county road that eventually connects back to 87. The trucks followed. I tried not to look like I was checking my mirrors, but I couldn't stop glancing up. The lid truck kept its high beams on, making it impossible to see details. About 10 miles later, I pulled over at a wide gravel turnout next to an old windmill and killed my headlights. If they were just going somewhere, I figured they'd keep driving. They didn't. Both trucks stopped too, maybe 50 yards behind me, engines idling. Their headlights cut across the gravel. The air conditioner had been running full blast, but suddenly it felt hot and close inside. I remember resting my hand on the gear shift and realizing I was sweating through my shirt. We sat like that for a while, maybe a minute, maybe 5. Then, almost in sync, the trucks turned off their headlights. No brake lights, no door slams, just black. I waited, trying to make out silhouettes or movement, but the light had faded to that point where everything's just shapes and shadows. I couldn't even tell if the engines were still running. Finally, I started my car and pulled back onto the road. My headlights swept over empty fields, fences, and dry grass waving in the heat haze that hadn't quite burned off. I didn't see anyone outside the trucks. When I checked my mirror, both sets of headlights came on again, perfectly timed. I drove faster, 70, 75. The road was rough and narrow, so I had to keep both hands tight on the wheel. They stayed behind me, never gaining or dropping back. I don't know if they were coordinating by radio, but it was unnerving how exact they were. Then I hit a stretch of road where the horizon opens up and you can see for miles. I checked the mirror again, and they were just gone. No headlights, no tail lights, nothing. The whole road behind me was empty. I slowed down, scanned both sides, even turned off my high beams to see if I could catch their lights reflecting off the terrain somewhere. Nothing. I kept driving until I reached Brady and pulled into a gas station. I parked under the fluorescent lights by the air pump, just sat there with my hands on the wheel, trying to figure out what the hell had just happened. I'd installed a dash cam a few months earlier after someone sideswiped my truck in a parking lot. When I scrolled through the footage later, the stretch of road where the trucks followed me was blank. I jumped straight from the herd of cattle to me, turning onto the county road 10 miles later. No gap in timestamps, no corruption message, just nothing recorded. At home that night, I checked the SD card on my laptop. The files were all there, but that 20-minute span was just static. I tried reformatting it, tried viewing it in another player, but the same thing happened. Nothing but grey fuzz and no audio. Over the next couple of days, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I told my cousin on the phone, and he laughed at first. Said it was probably Border Patrol or oil guys running drills. But he got quiet when I mentioned the missing footage. He told me to just forget about it. The next morning I went out to my truck to drive to work. Fresh tyre marks were in the dust of my driveway. 2 sets like someone had backed in and pulled out again, not mine. I parked under the carport. The spacing looked wide, more like a pickup. When I went around to check my dash cam, the mount was still there, but the camera itself was gone. Just snapped off, clean, no pieces left behind. That night I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I'd see those headlights behind me perfectly matching my speed. Around midnight I heard a low rumble outside and went to the window. A black truck, one I didn't recognise, was parked down the street under a streetlight. It wasn't facing my house, just sitting there, engine running. I watched it for maybe 2 minutes before the lights cut off. When my eyes adjusted, it was gone. I didn't tell anyone else after that. I replaced the dash cam but stopped driving out that way. I even started leaving my porch light on all night, which I'd never done before. A few weeks later, I went through my phone gallery to show a co-worker some pictures from the trip. I had one I'd taken near Menard, the one with the cattle lined up by the fence, but it wasn't there anymore. I checked the cloud backup, my email, everything. It was just gone. That was almost a year ago now. The weirdest part isn't the trucks or the missing footage. It's how normal everything felt while it was happening. Like none of it was out of place. Like it was supposed to happen that way. And I stopped at a gas station along Highway 95, south of Tanapa, just after 9 at night. My drive had been long, starting from Arizona and heading to Reno for work. This wasn't a typical gas station. It was more like a forgotten spot with 2 old pumps, a single flickering light, and a building that looked like it hadn't seen a fresh coat of paint since the 1980s. The wind whipped dust across the empty lot. As I parked and sat for a moment, stretching my fingers around the steering wheel, an eerie silence hung in the air. Only the low hum of my engine and the soft ticking of the overhead light broke the quiet. That's when I spotted them. 2 men standing near the other pump, seemingly out of nowhere. I hadn't heard any car arrive. They wore black suits and black hats, clothing far too formal for this desolate place. More strange, they stood completely motionless, just staring directly at me. I tried to rationalise their presence. Maybe they were travellers or local workers. This part of Nevada was known for its odd spots, military zones, old mines, those weird restricted areas around Tanapa. But something felt off. They weren't getting gas, weren't moving toward the store, weren't doing anything at all. Just standing side by side, watching me intently. The pump clicked off. I capped the tank and got back in the car, telling myself they were probably just locals. But when I glanced up, they were closer, maybe 5 or 6 feet nearer, though I hadn't seen them move. My chest tightened. I checked the mirrors. No other vehicles anywhere. I put the car in drive and pulled toward the exit, keeping them in view. They didn't turn to follow, but I knew they were still facing my direction. Once I hit the highway, I drove fast, that unsettling feeling of being watched still hanging over me. And I was driving down a long empty desert road, pushing the speedometer hard. The landscape blurred past me, nothing but sagebrush and endless asphalt stretching to the horizon. About a mile in, I glanced at the rearview mirror and caught a glimpse of the station's light, now just a tiny flickering dot against the darkness. A sudden flash caught my attention. Not like lightning, but a sharp white-blue pulse far away, clean and quick, as if someone had taken a single photograph. It vanished almost instantly. I slowed down, scanning the empty road. My headlights swept across the terrain, revealing nothing unusual. I tried convincing myself it was just a distant plane or a mountain reflection, but my heart was racing. Minutes later, headlights appeared behind me. At first it seemed normal, People often travelled this route. But something felt off. The vehicle maintained exactly the same distance, regardless of my speed. They were far enough back that I couldn't identify the car, but close enough to feel present. Every time I adjusted my speed, they matched me precisely. A growing sense of being watched crept over me, similar to the strange pressure I'd felt at the station. I decided to pull over at a small area with a single streetlight, hoping the other vehicle would pass. I waited, watching my mirror. Strangely, the headlights didn't move. After about 30 seconds, I switched off my lights to get a better look. Instantly, their lights went dark too. Panic set in. The desert was silent except for wind brushing against my car. No phone signal. Getting out seemed impossible. The road felt too exposed, too vulnerable. After a couple of minutes, I turned my lights back on. Immediately, their lights reappeared, and now they were closer. That was the breaking point. I floored the accelerator, driving hard and fast. For at least 20 minutes I raced without slowing, constantly checking my mirrors. The road twisted and turned, rising and falling, but those lights remained consistently behind me. Then, without warning, they vanished. Not dimmed or turned off, simply gone. I slowed down, expecting them to reappear around a bend or over a hill, but the highway behind me was completely empty. I spent the next hour trying to make sense of what had happened, but nothing added up. The entire experience remained a complete mystery. I parked a few spots away near Bay, taking a moment to catch my breath. Another car was nearby, a silver SUV with its window down, a guy smoking inside. When I finally stepped out to use the restroom, something caught my eye on my windshield. A single black business card was tucked under the wiper. No logo, no contact information, just a plain black card. At first, I thought the wind might have blown it there, but the night was windy and the card remained perfectly in place. Its edges were clean and undisturbed. I hesitated to touch it, but eventually did. The card felt different, thicker than a normal business card, almost like plastic, with a smooth, almost oily surface. I tossed it into the glove box and forgot about it. The next morning in Tanapa, while stopping for breakfast, I went to look at the card again, but it had vanished. I searched everywhere. The floor, the seats, under the mats. Nothing. I kept the incident to myself for a while. The few people I eventually told dismissed it, suggesting I was tired or had fallen victim to some local prank. I wanted to believe that explanation. Weeks later, something else happened back home in Flagstaff while I was unpacking and cleaning the car. Opening the trunk, I noticed a thin line of dust on the inside of the lid, as if someone had traced a finger across it. The line formed a curve I couldn't quite describe. Not a letter, not a recognisable symbol, just a neat, deliberate loop. It appeared faint, seeming days old, which made no sense since no one had touched my car since I'd returned. That night, while making coffee, my phone vibrated with an unknown number. The message was brief. "We appreciate your cooperation." I deleted it immediately, turned off my phone, and tried to forget about it. The next morning, the message was completely gone. Not just deleted, but with no trace anywhere. I told myself it was a scam or a wrong number, yet every time I drive that route I find myself scanning the horizon. And at gas stations I can't help but look for two men in suits standing perfectly still. The stillness was absolute. No movement, no sound, just pure, intense observation. Every muscle frozen, every breath controlled. The world around me seemed to pause, waiting. My focus was razor sharp, locked onto something unseen but deeply felt. Silence wrapped around me like a heavy blanket, blocking out everything except the moment itself. Something was happening, though nothing appeared to be happening at all.